Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Paranormal M. Before we begin, please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you enjoy these stories, leave the video a like. Tonight's first story is about two strange things that happened to the same person back in the 2000s. The first starts with a late-night drive on an isolated road in southern Maryland, where an old service station seemed to appear out of nowhere. The second takes place years later, on Trinity Lake, with something glowing under the water. Let's get into the first one, and I hope you sleep well tonight. I've got two stories I've never been able to fully explain. They both happened sometime in the 2000s, and I'm still not sure I'd call them paranormal exactly. But strange? Absolutely. The kind of strange that settles into the back of your mind and keeps a little room there. The first one happened on an old back road in southern Maryland. I was driving late one night with a friend, Mara, and the road wasn't far from where we lived then. People around there had stories about it. Ghost lights, figures near the trees, things appearing where they shouldn't. So, naturally, we went looking. Not because we were brave, really. More because we were young, curious, and just foolish enough to think the dark might perform for us. It was summer, but not hot. The air coming through the open windows had that cool, damp feeling you get near fields and woods at night. We had the radio on low, just something humming in the background, though I couldn't tell you what it was now. Then we came up to a four-way stop. There was one flashing red traffic light hanging over the middle of the intersection, blinking slowly over everything. Off to the right, there was this old service station. I mean old. It looked like it had closed in the late 1950s, and nobody had touched it since. There was a faded gas sign on a pole out front, the kind that used to be lit up by little round bulbs. And then I thought I heard music. I told Mara, "Turn the radio off for a second." She did, and we both went quiet. That's when we heard it clearly. Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny, playing softly, like it was coming from those old metal horn speakers mounted above the pumps. We just sat there. The red light kept flashing over the station, over the sign, over the empty road. Nothing about it felt threatening. That was the odd part. It didn't feel like a horror movie. It felt peaceful, almost beautiful, like we had accidentally driven through a little pocket of somebody else's memory. We listened for a minute or two, then drove on. The next day, I said, "We should go back and take pictures of that old gas station in daylight." Mara agreed right away. We grabbed coffee and headed back out, both of us kind of excited to see it again. After about 15 minutes, we came around the bend, and there was the intersection. There was the flashing red light. There was the old gas sign. But the station was gone. Not closed, not boarded up. Gone. There was just an empty concrete pad with weeds growing through the cracks. The kind of weeds that had clearly been there for years. There was no way a full service station had been standing there the night before. But we had both seen it. We had both heard the music. Neither of us said much after that. The whole day changed shape somehow. It felt like we'd stepped into something we weren't supposed to notice, and then the world quietly corrected itself behind us. I still don't know what we saw. The second story happened on July 4th, 2008. A few friends and I had taken a boat out onto Trinity Lake in California. We'd spent the day tearing around the water, jumping off the boat while it was moving, then circling back to pick each other up. It was reckless in the way things sometimes are when everyone thinks they're too alive for anything bad to happen. By the time we were ready to head back, it was completely dark. Not city dark, lake dark. The kind where the sky is full of stars, but the water below you looks bottomless. One of our friends was still in the water, so we pulled up beside him and hauled him back into the boat. He stood there for half a second trying to get his balance, then slipped and fell right off the other side. We all started laughing. It was ridiculous, and the sound of it carried across the lake. Then 2 of us decided to jump in one last time before heading back. So 3 of us were in the water, splashing around, while one guy stayed in the boat. That's when he started yelling, "Guys, guys!" At first we thought he was joking. Then his voice changed. "Guys, get out of the water!" We looked up at him, and I remember seeing his face lit from below. That's when I looked down. The water beneath us was glowing. There was this large orange ball of light rising from deep below the surface, maybe 4 feet across, maybe bigger. It was moving up toward us, getting brighter and clearer every second. I can still see it in my head, that orange glow under the black water, our legs and feet lighting up as it came closer. We all started screaming, grown adults screaming like kids. The 3 of us in the water scrambled for the boat at the same time, grabbing at the side, grabbing at each other, kicking, slipping, clawing our way in with no dignity at all. Just pure animal panic. We got back into the boat right before the light reached the place where we had been floating. And then it stopped. It shifted direction and sank back down into the lake. A few seconds later, the water was black again, completely black, like nothing had ever been there. None of us had an explanation then. I still don't have one now. This happened about a 1.5 years ago when we were on holiday in Turkey. We were staying at this resort in Antalya, right by the water, and one night my son, Leo, who was 10 at the time, and I got this lovely idea that we'd sleep out on the balcony so we could listen to the waves. In our heads, it was going to be peaceful and magical. You know, one of those holiday memories that feels all soft around the edges. In reality, it was not quite that. We didn't have enough pillows or blankets to make the balcony comfortable, so we were sort of shifting around on this hard little setup, trying to pretend it was cozy. And then, somewhere nearby, someone on another balcony had either a TV or a phone playing really loudly in German, so instead of the sound of the sea, we mostly had that. My husband was inside trying to sleep, and he was getting more and more annoyed because my son and I kept laughing and whispering. We were trying to be quiet, but you know how it is when you're trying not to laugh. Everything becomes 10 times funnier. Eventually, the person with the loud TV turned it off, and we both settled down properly. I thought, right, now we can actually sleep. And then a huge insect landed on me. I sat straight up and brushed it off, and that was it for me. I told Leo, "No, I'm done. This is uncomfortable, there are bugs, and we are absolutely not sleeping out here." But he said, No, let's just watch the sea for a little bit. Dad will be annoyed if we go back in and wake him up again." So we stayed there for a moment, looking out toward the beach. It wasn't far away, just a short walk from the hotel. The waves were dark and silver, and the whole place had that strange quiet you get at resorts late at night, where everything feels half asleep, but still somehow watching. Then I looked down. There was a path directly below our balcony. It ran past some sliding glass doors that led into the hotel, then along by an open-air restaurant area. And right in the middle of that path, there was this big, strange thing. I could not work out what I was looking at. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for my brain to make sense of it, but it just wouldn't. So I asked Leo, because I thought maybe his eyesight would be better in the dark. I said, "What is that?" And he went quiet for a second, then said, "I don't know." That made my stomach do this tiny little drop, because I expected him to say something normal. A trolley, a plant, a stack of chairs, anything. But he couldn't tell either. The only way I can describe what I saw is this. It looked like a huge pile of washing, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, It had a round sort of base, like it was sitting on the ground, and there was something like a pole sticking out of the top. On the end of that pole was what looked like a round glass lampshade or bulb. But the rest of it was just impossible. A big, messy, shapeless bundle. Like laundry, but not laundry. Like an object pretending to be an object and doing a terrible job of it. And the oddest part was that the path wasn't completely dark. There were lights around. This wasn't some shadowy corner where your eyes could invent things. It was right there, in the middle of the path. Then 2 men came walking into view from the beachside. They looked like they'd been out for the evening, dressed quite smartly, walking quickly and talking in Turkish. And they just walked past it. Not around it in a careful way, not slowing down, not looking at it. They passed either side of it, far too close, as if they didn't see it at all. I'm not saying they walked through it. They didn't. But they moved so close to it that it made no sense if that thing was really there in the ordinary way. It was big. It was in the middle of the path. You couldn't miss it. At that point, I said to Leo, "We're going down. I need to see what it is." By then, my husband was awake and irritated, asking what on earth we were doing. But we didn't really explain. We just put our shoes on and ran downstairs. We were only 1 floor up, so it couldn't have taken more than a minute. And when we got down there, it was gone. Completely gone. There was nothing outside the glass doors. No hotel staff, no trolley, no equipment being wheeled away, no pile of anything. The path was empty. And somehow I wasn't even surprised. The second I started running downstairs, I had this feeling that whatever it was, it wouldn't be there when we arrived. We walked around for a bit, checking the nearby area, but there was nothing. No explanation hiding behind a corner. No object that had been moved. Nothing that looked even slightly like what we had seen. I asked Leo, "Tell me exactly what you saw." And he said, "I don't know. It was like a giant shop stand with big postcards on it. But then it was also like a furry orange cat. Like a man in a big costume. It was one thing and then the other." That really unsettled me, because that wasn't what I had seen. For me, it didn't change. I saw that strange tall pile with the glassy bulb shape on top. But for him, it seemed to shift between 2 completely different things. We went back upstairs, and my husband, still grumpy and half asleep, said it was probably just hotel workers moving equipment. But we would have seen them. We were down there so quickly. And whatever that thing was, it was big. If someone had moved it, we would have caught at least some sign of it. The thing that stays with me is how impossible it was to understand. Not frightening in a dramatic way, not like some monster from a film. Just wrong. Visually wrong. Like my brain kept trying to label it, and every label fell off. We were both wide awake. We hadn't dreamed it. We were talking, sitting up, looking straight at it. I've wondered so many times what it could have been. A djinn, maybe. Some kind of shape-shifting thing. Something that couldn't decide what it was supposed to look like to us. But that's the part I still can't get over. Because if you were trying to disguise yourself, why choose something so ridiculous? Why not look like a cleaning cart, or stacked chairs, or a plant pot? Something that belonged there. Instead, it looked like a giant heap of nonsense standing politely in the middle of a hotel path at night. And honestly, I still think about it all the time. I want to tell you about something that happened to me in broad daylight. Something I still don't fully know how to explain. I was sitting out in my backyard one afternoon, listening to music through my headphones, just having a quiet moment to myself. Then I heard this sound. At first, my mind tried to make sense of it as something familiar, maybe metal crashing together, like a car accident out front. So I stood up and looked toward the street. But there was nothing there. No accident. No cars pulled over. No one shouting. Nothing. I sat back down, confused, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized it hadn't really sounded like a crash at all. It was strange, almost mechanical, but not in any normal way. The closest thing I can compare it to is something from a science fiction movie, like a portal opening or time tearing open. I laughed it off at first and figured maybe my headphones had glitched. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard the exact same sound again. And this time, there was no brushing it off. Right there, in front of my house, this enormous, luminous blue sphere appeared. It was huge, almost the size of 2 cars side by side. It looked like an orb, or maybe some kind of Merkaba shape, but it was also hard to pin down because it kept shifting. It was every shade of blue you could imagine. Deep blue, electric blue, pale blue, colors inside colors. Somehow it looked transparent and solid at the same time. It just hovered there in the air, and the light coming from it didn't feel like ordinary light. It looked alive. It moved and shimmered like it was breathing. I remember having the feeling that I wasn't just looking at an object. I was looking at something aware. Then I saw 2 cars coming down the street from opposite directions, and my first thought was, someone else is going to see this. Finally, I won't be the only one. But they didn't see it. Neither driver slowed down, neither one reacted. And as the cars passed through the sphere, the front of each car just vanished into it. For a split second, when both cars were inside it, they disappeared completely from view. Then they came out the other side and kept driving like nothing had happened. After that, the orb moved. It almost seemed to pull itself backward, like it was gathering force, and then it shot forward toward my front yard. I didn't know what to do with what I had just witnessed. I kept replaying it in my mind, trying to find some ordinary explanation, but nothing fit. And then, later that night, something else happened. I was near the back of the house when I saw a tall figure made of white light moving along the side of my backyard. It had a human shape, but no face, no eyes, no mouth, no details. Just this bright, living white radiance. It moved incredibly fast, like it was sprinting, except it wasn't touching the ground. At first, I panicked. I ran back toward the door because my body reacted before my mind could catch up. But then, something strange happened. I realized I didn't actually feel afraid. Not really. There had been that first shock, that instinctive jolt, but underneath it was curiosity. More than that, there was a kind of calm. So I went back outside. I started down the steps into the yard, and I had barely reached the second step when the light being bolted behind a tree maybe 5 feet away from me. I froze. Then I felt this surge of energy shoot up through my body, starting from the soles of my feet and rushing all the way to the top of my head. It felt like lightning, but not painful. It was powerful, overwhelming, and somehow deeply familiar. That moment changed something in me. And the reason I say that is because, up until then, I had lived for years in a constant state of dissociation. Because of severe childhood trauma, I had been disconnected from my own body, my own emotions, my own sense of being here. People had often told me that my presence made them feel calm or safe, but I never understood it because I didn't feel that way inside myself. I had been cut off from my feelings for a very long time. I think some part of me had left in order to survive. But that night, after that encounter, I felt something return. I don't have perfect words for it. The closest I can say is that it felt like my soul finally felt safe enough to come back into my body. Afterward, I researched everything I could. I read about soul retrieval, about the idea that parts of us can leave during trauma and return when we are finally ready. I found stories and traditions that sounded close to what I experienced, but nothing that gave me complete proof or a neat explanation. I still don't have that. What I do have is what changed afterward. Since that night, my ability to feel has continued to grow. It's like something opened in me that has never fully closed again. I was already alive before, technically, but I was surviving more than living. That night felt different. That night, it felt like I came back. I should start by saying that whatever was happening out there has not happened in a while. It came up recently when my brother and I were talking about strange things we've experienced, and it made me realize I had never really told this story all the way through. Some of the details are a little blurry now, because the strangest parts happened a couple of summers ago. So I'm only going to talk about the parts I feel sure about. I live out in a rural part of northern Georgia, close to the base of the Appalachian Mountains. It is quiet here in a way that feels heavy sometimes. At night, you mostly hear insects, leaves moving, maybe an animal calling from somewhere far off. Because of where I live, I've definitely wondered more than once if what I heard could be connected to some kind of local folklore or cryptid story. This started during the summer of 2023, sometime around late June, and it seemed to happen again during the same part of the year in 2024. The sounds always came from the far edge of my property, near a small pond that sits close to my neighbor's field. And what made it even stranger was the timing. It usually happened between about 10 at night and midnight, and then it would just stop. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a flute. It was very faint, almost buried underneath the cicadas and the wind moving through the trees. But it was there, a thin little tune drifting from the direction of the pond. I remember freezing because, in all the years I've lived here, I have never known anyone to be out there at night. The only things I ever see near that water are my neighbor's animals, mostly donkeys. The sound would fade in and out. Sometimes it got soft enough that I thought I was imagining it, and then it would rise again, just enough for me to know I wasn't. There may have been another sound too, something like slow, rhythmic tapping or drumming, but I'm less sure about that part. It's hazy. For most of 2023, that was all it was. Just that strange music now and then, always from the same direction. Then, in June of 2024, it came back. By that point, I started going outside and listening to it for longer stretches of time. Sometimes I would stand there for 10 or 15 minutes, just trying to figure out what I was hearing. I tried to get other people to come outside and listen, but every time I brought someone out, the sound would stop before they could hear it. After a while, strangely enough, I started to enjoy it. I told myself maybe someone nearby just liked playing music outside in the summer. Maybe they sat by the pond at night because it was peaceful. It was odd, sure, but I tried to convince myself it was harmless. Then I heard the children. It was brief, but I know what I heard. It sounded like 2 or maybe more small children talking over one another, almost like they were playing. Their voices seemed to move around near the pond, but there was no splashing, no footsteps, nothing else that made sense with it. Just those voices, and then silence. After that, I stopped going out of my way to listen for the music. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. The last time I remember hearing the flute was in July of 2024. Same place, same kind of tune. This time, I managed to get my younger brother outside in time, and he heard it too. That was honestly a relief, because it meant I wasn't the only one. He helped me explain to my family that there really did seem to be someone, or something, playing an instrument near the pond at night. There's one more detail that still bothers me. Near that pond, there's an old barn. It's run down now, half swallowed by trees, vines, and brush. At night, between the barn and the dark, you can't really see the pond at all. Years earlier, around 2017, before my current neighbors moved in, the property was empty and up for sale. A few of us went exploring back there. On the back side of the barn, I remember seeing writing painted in blue spray paint. I think it was either Spanish or Latin, and there was a star painted near it too. I started to read the words out loud, but someone immediately told me to stop, which, looking back, was probably fair. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now, thinking about the music, the voices, the timing, and how it always seemed to come from that same isolated spot, I can't help feeling unsettled by it. Nothing happened at all during 2025. I haven't heard anything so far this year either. But I still think about it every summer. The strangest part is how seasonal it felt, almost like whatever was happening only came around during those warm months. And when I remember those childlike voices near the pond, late at night, from a place where no children should have been, I still get chills. I want to tell you about the closest thing I've ever had to a paranormal encounter. I know how strange it sounds. I know it probably sounds impossible. But this is one of those memories that never really loosened its grip on me. I was very young, maybe 5 or 6. It would have been sometime in the late 80s. Back then, I slept in a little loft area in the first place I ever remember having my own space. It wasn't exactly a bedroom. It was more like a raised room built into an old converted garage apartment my grandfather had put together. One night, I was lying there in bed when I heard tapping at the window. That alone didn't make sense. The window was too high for anyone to reach from outside unless they had a ladder. I remember staring toward it, confused, trying to see what was there. But beyond the glass was just darkness. Not normal nighttime darkness either. It felt thick, like the world outside had been swallowed. For some reason, I got out of bed. I didn't wake my parents, which still seems impossible to me because they were light sleepers. I just walked outside, quiet as anything, and ended up near one of the old storage sheds where we kept tools and random things. I remember the air feeling cold. I remember reaching up for the old brass doorknob. The shed sat a few feet off the ground, so I had to pull myself up to get inside. The sky above me was this deep, eerie blue. Not fully night yet, but right at that moment where the last trace of daylight disappears. Inside the shed, there wasn't any light, but I could still make out shapes. Shelves, tools, corners, dusty things stacked along the walls. And then I got that feeling. I was being watched. I looked up toward the peak of the slanted roof, where there was a small triangular window. And there, somehow inside the glass itself, was this thin, black figure. I don't mean it was standing behind the window. I mean it looked embedded in the glass. Perched there, waiting. It had a shape that was almost human, but not quite. It was too spindly, too wrong. It was darker than anything around it, like it didn't reflect light at all. Around its edges, there was this faint shimmer, almost like oil moving on water, or a badly animated shadow flickering where it shouldn't. As a kid, the only way I could understand it was to think of a Sesame Street puppet, something like Grover, but pitch black and completely featureless. Then it moved. It unfolded itself out of the window, and with one huge step, it was right in front of me. I froze. I don't mean I got scared and stood still. I mean I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then its round head began to split open sideways, like an enormous mouth. From inside it came this blinding light, every color at once, bursting out in sharp patterns, triangles inside triangles, circles flashing through them. A tunnel of color that kept folding into itself. And there was a sound. It filled my whole head. It was like countless trumpets playing the lowest notes possible, all wrong, all at once. I didn't just hear it. I felt it in my body. I have no idea how long it lasted. It felt endless and instant at the same time. The next thing I remember, I was standing inside the house at the front door, looking out through the glass panes. The sky outside had turned orange, probably from distant streetlights. I went back to bed, but something in me felt off for a long time after that. Over the years, I tried to explain what happened, but people dismissed it. I was too young. It was a dream. It was imagination. And honestly, I understand why they would say that. But it didn't stop there. Growing up, I would sometimes find myself wandering outside around dusk or near nighttime, and that same feeling would come back. That watched feeling. Sometimes I thought I caught a glimpse of something like that figure again. I lived in a wooded, rural area near a small creek. We had deer sometimes, and there were coyotes and mountain lions farther up in the hills. But this wasn't that. I knew what animals looked like. Every so often, even now, I still get the feeling that it's nearby. There was one awful night years later when someone at a party slipped something into my drink. Whatever it was, it brought back that same kind of experience. Only this time, the night sky looked bright green, and there were several of those figures around me. It didn't feel like they had entered our world. It felt like I had accidentally stepped into theirs. That night ended with me trying to sleep while one of them tapped on my window again and again. Sometimes it comes back in lucid dreams. Not in some strange fantasy place either. Usually I'm just in my room. It's at the window or standing beside my bed. I can see it even with my eyes closed. It still scares me. That same old terror comes rushing back. But over time, I've learned how to push against it. Sometimes I can even communicate with it, though not with words. It's more like feelings passing back and forth. And when I show it that I see it, when I face it without letting the fear take over completely, it changes. It almost seems startled, flustered maybe. Then it leaves. Sometimes it appears as someone else in dreams, or as something else entirely, but I can usually recognize it now. I know the feeling of it. I call it out, and it goes away. I don't pretend to know what it is. The closest description I've ever found is something like a black stick figure, though that still doesn't quite capture it. It seems to show up mostly from fall into spring, though I can't remember what season that first encounter happened. And look, I know how unbelievable this sounds. I really do. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was my mind creating something from darkness and childhood dread. Maybe it was never there at all. But whatever it was, the effect it had on me was real. And some nights, when the window taps or the room feels just a little too still, I remember that shape in the glass. I've always felt like I had a pretty strong sense of intuition. Not in a dramatic way, like I could predict the future or anything. It was more like this quiet inner alarm that would go off before I had any real reason to be afraid. And over time, I started to notice that anxiety and intuition didn't feel the same to me. Anxiety felt scattered, heavy, loud in a way that made everything blurry. But intuition felt clean and sudden, almost sharp, like something in my stomach had been tapped with the edge of a blade. The thing is, that feeling wasn't the only strange part of my childhood. When I was little, I used to have these nights where I felt like something was watching me while I was trying to fall asleep. Sometimes I'd be lying on my side, facing the wall, and I would get this overwhelming sense that someone was lying right behind me, not touching me, not breathing on me, just there. It felt aware, and it felt wrong. I know that could easily be explained as a child being scared of the dark or having an overactive imagination. I've told myself that plenty of times. But then things changed after my family went through a really painful loss. After that, the house felt different. Things would fall off counters or shelves for no clear reason. Door handles would shake. The television would turn itself off and back on. Our dog would suddenly bark down the hallway or stare into empty corners like someone was standing there. At first, we all tried to brush it off. Old house, grief, stress, bad timing. But then, something started copying me. One night, my mom woke up because she heard my voice right next to her ear saying, "Mom." She said it sounded like I was trying to wake her up. She even felt a little tap, like someone had touched her. But I wasn't in the room. Another time, she heard her own name spoken in my voice. And on one of those nights, I wasn't even home. I was sleeping over at a friend's house. Then my older sister, Liana, had her own experience. She was in her room when she heard what sounded exactly like me outside her door. It was whispering her name, then saying, "Hey," over and over again. At first, she thought I was trying to scare her, so she ignored it. But it kept going. Finally, she snapped and told me to stop. That's when she said the voice changed. It wasn't my voice anymore. She said it turned into this horrible, growling, hissing sound right outside her room. She got so scared that she ran down the hallway to wake me up. And I remember that night clearly, because when she came to get me, I looked toward the dark end of the hallway and saw what looked like two cat-like eyes staring back at us. After a while, we had the house blessed, and honestly, after that, things seemed to stop. Years went by, and I tried not to think about it too much. But then I had another experience that still bothers me. I was taking a nap, and I had what felt like either a lucid dream or an out-of-body experience. I remember seeing myself asleep in bed. Then I was on the floor, crawling toward the clock in my room because I was trying to read the time. That's when I saw it. There was this dark, cloud-like shape hovering over my sleeping body. And then I heard a voice inside my head say, "We have you now." I know how all of this sounds. I really do. I'm open to the idea that some of it could be explained by grief, stress, sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, or the mind trying to make sense of fear. I'm not trying to force one explanation over another. But the part I keep coming back to is the mimicking. Why would something copy the voice of someone who is still alive? Why me specifically? That's the part I've never been able to shake. So I'm just wondering if anyone else has experienced anything like this, especially something imitating a living person's voice. I'd really appreciate any insight, even if it's just a grounded explanation or a similar story. My wife and I were talking about this again the other night, and even after all these years, I still don't know what to make of it. It happened about 6 years ago when we drove out to this small farming town for my cousin Daniel's wedding. I was in the wedding party, so there was no way I could skip it. The problem was, a few years before that, I'd been in a pretty serious car accident, and ever since then, long drives had made me anxious. But strangely enough, the drive there was fine, calm even. We stayed in this little rental house outside town, tucked off a gravel road with fields on every side. It had this huge front window that looked out over nothing but dark farmland. During the day, it probably seemed peaceful. At night, it felt like the house was staring into a black ocean. The wedding was lovely, but we left early before the music and dancing really got going. We were tired, and honestly, I was already thinking about the drive back. We went to sleep early, but for some reason, both of us woke up around 4:15 in the morning, completely alert. I remember turning to my wife, who was my girlfriend back then, and saying, "I actually feel okay to drive. Maybe we should head home now, beat the traffic, grab coffee somewhere." So that's what we did. It was bitter cold outside, probably somewhere in the high 30s, and the world was pitch black except for a lonely porch light here and there. We packed up, got in the car, turned on some quiet music, and I pulled up the map. There was a back road route through the countryside that looked faster than the highway, so I took it. At first, everything felt fine. Then we passed this old barn. It was leaning a little, made of gray, weathered wood, sitting alone beside the road. The second we got near it, this dense fog seemed to appear from nowhere. Not a light mist. A thick, strange curtain of it wrapped around the barn like it belonged there. We drove straight through it, and I remember both of us commenting on how sudden it was. Then, the moment we came out the other side, headlights appeared behind us. A red pickup truck pulled onto the road right after us. Older model, beat up, with one headlight slightly brighter than the other. At first I thought, okay, someone else is out early. But then the truck started swerving. It drifted over the center line, then back again. It kept edging out like it was going to pass, then falling back behind us. I slowed down, thinking, "Go ahead, man, just pass." But when I slowed down, he slowed down too. Then he got right up on my bumper. And I mean close. So close I couldn't see the front of his truck anymore, just the glow filling the whole back window. This went on for maybe 20 minutes. He'd drop back, speed up, flash his brights, swerve like he was trying to scare us, then ride our bumper again. My hands were locked on the wheel. My wife was sitting perfectly still, watching him in the mirror. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. After about half an hour, he finally put on his turn signal, and I felt this huge rush of relief. We came up to a red light, and he was signaling like he was about to turn off. But when the light changed, he didn't turn. He stayed right behind us. That's when it stopped feeling like some reckless driver and started feeling deliberate. He kept doing it, swerving, flashing his lights, pretending to pass, pulling up so close it felt like he was trying to push us off the road. And the strangest part was that the fog never went away. It stayed around us the entire time, even though we were moving through miles of open country. It felt like we had driven into something and couldn't get out. After almost an hour of this, we finally reached a bigger main road. More lights, wider lanes, a few signs of civilization. And just like that, the truck backed off. It turned into an empty church parking lot, rolled slowly toward the far side, and disappeared into the darkness. We drove the rest of the way home barely saying a word. To this day, I still don't know what happened out there. Maybe it was just some dangerous lunatic on a back road at 4 in the morning. But every time I think about that barn, that fog, and those headlights appearing the second we came through it, I get the same cold feeling in my chest. Because it didn't feel random. It felt like something had been waiting. I'll call myself L for privacy. I'm 20 now, and when I look back on my life, it feels like I grew up between two very different worlds. Part of my childhood was in Florida, and part of it was in Alabama. I moved between my dad's side of the family and my mom's side, and both families had completely different ideas about the paranormal. My dad's side was very Catholic, but they also believed deeply in spirits, curses, reincarnation, dark presences, and brujeria. When I was little, there were rooms in my cousin's house that we were never allowed to go into. He was involved in witchcraft, and the adults took that seriously. My abuela would make us stay in our rooms whenever certain people came over. There was one man they called the Voodoo Man, and we were told not to look at him, speak to him, or ask anything about him. Back then, I was more curious than scared. But even as a child, I could tell the adults weren't pretending. They were genuinely afraid of certain things. Later, we moved to Alabama onto my mom's family land. That place had a completely different kind of heaviness to it. It was deep in the woods, behind a long gravel road and a locked gate. There were old barns, empty workshops, hunting trails, abandoned houses, and a family cemetery down the hill. Some of the graves had names, some didn't. Past the cemetery was my great-grandfather's old house, slowly falling apart in the woods. During the day, I would wander around because I was a curious kid. But at night, I wouldn't even look out the windows toward that cemetery. I didn't just feel creeped out there. I felt watched. And the strange thing is, my mom had felt it too, long before I was ever born. She told me her friends hated sleeping over because they thought the property was haunted. One night, one of her friends woke up crying because she said she saw lights moving through the cemetery and heard 3 loud knocks at the front door in the middle of the night. Her mom had to come get her around 2 a.m. because she was so terrified. My mom eventually admitted that she had always felt watched there too. Even my mama had stories about that land. There's one old family photograph that still bothers me. In it, my mama is standing in her garden, smiling at the camera. But behind her, there's a tall man nobody recognizes. He has light hair, pale eyes, and overalls on. He's standing there so clearly, like he meant to be in the picture. My family swears he wasn't there when the photo was taken. Nobody knows who he was. Something else has always made me uneasy too. People have always said I look exactly like my mom. Not just a little bit, almost identical. We even have photos of us at the same age, and honestly, if it weren't for the clothes, we could almost pass for the same person. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was on that land ever mistook me for her. One day, I asked my grandmother why some of the graves didn't have names. That was when she told me that, years ago, when plantations were still operating nearby, my family found a young runaway boy in the woods. He was very sick with a fever. They tried to help him, but he died there on the property, and they buried him near a tree. After I heard that, the whole place felt heavier. As I got older, I started hearing things. Footsteps, scratching in the walls, little sounds that made no sense, and all the time, I had this feeling that someone was standing just behind me. Eventually we moved away, but the feeling didn't completely leave. When I was about 13, we moved into an older house on a hill near a winding road. My room had this strange, locked compartment built into the wall above my bed. It had an old, rusted knob and a keyhole. I never opened it, but I hated sleeping under it. Around that time, my parents' relationship started falling apart, and the whole house felt tense and suffocating. Later, my mom met someone else, and we moved into a trailer in Florida with him and his family. From the moment I met him, something about him felt wrong. That was where I had the first experience I truly cannot explain. One summer night, I woke up suddenly with the feeling that something was staring at me. Everyone else was asleep. Down the hallway, there were sheer curtains, and it looked like something was moving behind them. Then the air turned freezing cold. It felt like pressure was pressing down on my chest and throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stared down the hallway, terrified, while my body felt weak and dizzy. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The next morning, I saw scratches along my side. After that, things in my life seemed to get worse, and through all of it, I always felt like something was close by. By freshman year, I became really interested in paranormal topics and spirituality. Not because I wanted to summon anything or invite anything in. I just wanted to understand what had been happening to me. Eventually, I moved in with my foster mom. Things were peaceful at first, but after a while, strange things started happening there too. Footsteps, scratching sounds, my doorknob rattling at night. One night around 3 a.m., my foster mom woke up angry because someone had been knocking on her bedroom door. My brothers were awake playing video games, and they swore they didn't knock. They said they hadn't even heard anything. The cameras didn't show anyone. Eventually, she got uncomfortable enough to ask me what I thought we should do. I suggested cleansing the house with sage and firmly saying that whatever was there wasn't welcome. And strangely enough, after that, things slowly stopped. Years later, I reconnected with my dad's side of the family and moved in for a while with my grandparents and aunt. That house felt unbearably heavy from the start. Everyone there openly admitted they heard and saw things. One morning, after I came home from a friend's house, my grandma and aunt asked me out of nowhere if I thought something might be attached to me. Then they asked if I had ever been baptized. I laughed at first because I thought they were joking. They were not joking. My aunt told me that a little girl had died in the house years ago, and that they sometimes saw her at night. She said the girl had black hair, a white dress, and no face. Then my aunt said something I've never forgotten. "She doesn't like you." Later, they had me sit alone in the back room, where most of the activity supposedly happened. Within minutes, the room turned freezing cold. I felt this overwhelming sadness and fear, like it had been poured over me. Then came that pressure again, all over my body, making it hard to breathe. Every part of me was screaming to get out. I finally ran out of the room shaking. My aunt later said my face looked different when I came out. After I sat down, they noticed 3 long scratches across my back. I still remember my grandmother praying over me afterward. The strangest part is that even after moving away, I still sometimes feel watched. Sometimes I hear scratching or movement at night. Nothing violent has happened recently, thankfully, but that feeling has never fully gone away. What really stays with me is how people react when I tell them about it. My boyfriend doesn't laugh or brush it off. He gets genuinely concerned. He's told me more than once that the things I describe don't sound normal, and sometimes he seems almost scared when I talk about them. Part of me wonders if growing up around fear, trauma, old family land, and strong spiritual beliefs shaped the way I see things. But another part of me can't ignore how consistent it has all been. Different houses, different people, different times in my life, and somehow, the same feeling always finds me. Before I get into this, I should probably say that I've never really been someone who believes in paranormal things. I'm not completely closed off to it, honestly. Part of me would love to be proven wrong. But whenever something strange has happened to me, my brain always tries to explain it away as stress, imagination, or maybe even some kind of hallucination. Still, these memories came back to me recently, and even now, they feel strange enough that I think they're worth telling. The first one happened when I was around 11 or 12, maybe a few weeks after my great-grandfather passed away. I was home by myself, just staying in my room like usual. At some point, I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got up and opened my bedroom door. And there he was. My great-grandfather was sitting on the floor in the hallway, right near my grandfather's bedroom door, looking straight at me. He didn't look sick. He didn't look like a ghost from a movie. He looked exactly the way I remembered him when he was alive. Real, solid, present. I froze. I don't think I even breathed properly for a few seconds. Then I shut my door and went right back into my room. I stayed there for what felt like forever, probably close to an hour, trying to convince myself to go back out. I kept telling myself I must have imagined it. I was scared, but I still really needed to use the bathroom, so eventually I opened the door again. He was still there. Same spot, same position, same quiet stare. That was enough for me. I closed the door locked myself in my room, and stayed there until my parents came home. The next experiences happened years later when I was in high school. They weren't really one single event, more like the same thing happening more than once. The house I grew up in was split into two connected parts. One side had the bedrooms and living room, and the other side had the kitchen and bathroom. One night, I was in the bathroom when I suddenly heard stomping outside. And I don't mean normal footsteps. This sound was heavy, huge. It didn't sound like a person, and it didn't sound like an animal either. It was something moving back and forth between the two parts of the house, stomping hard enough that I could feel the fear crawl right up my spine. I just stayed in the bathroom, completely still, listening to it go on for at least 10 minutes. Even after it stopped, I waited nearly an hour before I worked up the courage to run back to my bedroom. Then it happened again another night. Same place, same time of day, same awful stomping. I waited it out again, sitting there in the bathroom, trying to calm myself down. After it finally stopped, I thought, okay, this is my chance. I was getting ready to make a run for it. And then it started again. That time, I was trapped in there for hours, too scared to leave. It happened once when I was on the bedroom side of the house too, but I felt a little safer because my family was closer. Every time it happened, I told my parents. They went outside to check, but they never found anything. I even tried stomping as hard as I could later, just to see if I could recreate the sound. It wasn't even close. Not remotely. Those are the biggest memories, but they weren't the only ones. When I was younger, I was convinced our house was haunted. I would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. I'd get this strong feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes the air in the house felt heavy, like something was nearby, just out of sight. I still don't know what any of it really was. Maybe there's a normal explanation. Maybe my mind was filling in the dark corners with things that weren't there. But I know how it felt. And at the time, it felt very, very real. I still don't really know what to make of this, and honestly, part of me keeps wondering if my brain was just exhausted and filling in shadows. Back in April, I moved out of a newer apartment and into an older place because the rent at my previous place had gotten completely out of hand. My landlord had already been frustrated with us being behind on rent a few times, and eventually, we were given 10 days to find somewhere else. So I was rushing, stressed, and just trying to land anywhere decent. That's how we ended up in this older apartment in downtown New Westminster. It was about $1,000 cheaper than what we had been paying before, which felt almost suspicious. We kept thinking, okay, there has to be something wrong with it. Mice, bugs, mold, noisy neighbors, something. But there wasn't anything obvious. It was still a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom place, just older. The appliances were dated, the carpet had seen better decades, and the tile looked tired. But when I first toured it, I didn't feel anything strange. The only real issue was that the landlords clearly hadn't cleaned it. So on moving day, I went over there by myself to deep clean while the movers were packing up the old apartment. That day turned into a marathon. The movers took something like 11 hours to get everything transferred over, and I was alone in the new place for most of it, scrubbing, wiping, unpacking little things, breathing in cleaning products, and running on stress. At some point, I started seeing movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I told myself it was nothing. I was tired. I was overwhelmed. The apartment was unfamiliar. Maybe reflections were bouncing off something. Maybe I'd inhaled too much cleaner and my brain was throwing a tiny haunted house party without my permission. But then it kept happening. Eventually, I sat down in one of the bedrooms and watched a movie on my phone because I suddenly felt really uneasy. I couldn't explain it. I just needed to stop moving for a while. Later, after the movers finally left, my mom and I started unpacking together. And that's when I kept seeing him. Not clearly, never straight on, but always in the corner of my eye. It looked like a man walking quickly back and forth through the apartment, like he was pacing. Every time I turned my head to look directly at him, there was nothing there. No shadow, no person, no sound, just empty space. But then, a few minutes later, there he'd be again, just at the edge of my vision. This went on for hours. We kept unpacking until around 2 or 3 in the morning, and by then I was completely drained. I finally sat down, trying to breathe and convince myself the whole day had just scrambled my senses. Then my mom came into my room and said, very quietly, "I don't like saying this, but I think this apartment is haunted." I looked at her and asked, "Why would you say that?" And she said, "Because I keep seeing a man walking around out of the corner of my eye." That was the moment my stomach dropped. I hadn't told her what I'd been seeing, so I asked her to describe him. She said he looked like a white man, maybe late 20s or 30s, with brown hair cut just above his ears. She said he was wearing a beige, sleeveless shirt and blue jeans. And I just went cold, because that was exactly what I had been seeing all night. The hard part is, I'm not really someone who believes in this kind of thing. I'm agnostic, leaning more atheist, so ghosts and spirits have never been part of how I explain the world. But that night, I finally said out loud, "If someone is here, we don't want to see you. We know you're here, and we don't mean any harm, but please don't show yourself to us." And after that, things changed. It's been a couple of months now, and neither of us has seen him like we did that first night. Every now and then, one of us might catch a quick flicker of movement in our peripheral vision, but nothing as constant or as clear as that first night. So I'm still left wondering what actually happened. Was it stress? Exhaustion? Some weird trick of the eyes? Or is there some kind of phenomenon where two people can see the same figure, especially when it disappears the second you try to look straight at it? I went to Donner Memorial State Park last summer with my family while they were visiting us in California. My husband Mark and I thought it would be a meaningful place to take everyone. It was mid-July, one of those bright, hot, trucky days where the sky looks almost polished and everything around you feels green and alive. The trail there loops along Donner Creek. One side opens up near this flat, marshy meadow, and the other side is more wooded and shaded. We came in through the wooded entrance first, passing the huge boulder where one of the Donner Party cabins had once been built against it. After that, we crossed the creek and followed the path around the other side. I'm always stopping to take pictures, and that day was no different. The place looked strangely beautiful. Blue sky, tall evergreens, sunlit grass, all of it so peaceful on the surface. I remember thinking how odd it was that somewhere with such a tragic history could look that calm. At one point, I looked up from my phone and realized my family had already rounded a bend ahead of me. There were a few other visitors behind me on the trail, so I hurried a little to catch up. The path crossed a marshy section on a boardwalk, then changed into sandy ground before meeting a strip of asphalt. As I came around that curve, I suddenly felt like I had walked straight through something. The only way I can describe it is a spider web, but not a normal one. It felt thick, cold, and heavy, like it passed over my face and arms all at once. The strange thing was, there was nothing there. No web, no branch, nothing touching me. But my body reacted immediately. I shivered hard, even though it was hot outside. Every hair on my arms stood straight up. I got this deep wave of goosebumps, the kind that feels like your body knows something before your mind can explain it. And almost instantly, this awful sense of dread settled over me. I caught up with my family and showed them my arms. The goosebumps were still clearly visible. I told them what had happened and asked if they had felt anything in that spot, but none of them had. They were totally fine. No chill, no weird feeling, nothing. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. I felt uneasy for the rest of the walk, like something behind me had noticed me. It wasn't panic exactly. It was heavier than that. A kind of warning feeling, low and steady in my stomach. Eventually, once we went into the museum and wandered around the gift shop, the feeling faded enough that I could distract myself. I told myself it was probably just the weight of knowing what had happened there. I'm practical by nature, and I knew the history of the area. I figured maybe my imagination had gotten tangled up in the place. But then, about a year later, I was putting together a slideshow of our California trips. I came across the photos I had taken at the park, especially the ones from that exact stretch of trail. The photos looked completely normal. Bright sky, warm sunlight, green grass, tall trees. Nothing strange, nothing dark, nothing that should have bothered me. But the second I looked at them, my body reacted all over again. My stomach turned. I felt nauseous almost immediately. That same uneasy, sinking feeling came back, as if I were standing on that trail again. I had already added the photos to the slideshow, but after looking at them for a while and feeling worse instead of better, I removed them. That surprised me more than the original experience, honestly. I've seen plenty of disturbing things online over the years, and I've visited ghost towns, battlefields, old mines, caves, and abandoned cemeteries. I've been in places with sad or violent histories before, but I have never had my body react like that to a place. Even now, just talking about it, I can feel that queasy feeling starting again. I don't know what happened there. I don't know if I walked through some kind of energy, or if my body picked up on something my mind couldn't process, or if the history of that place simply landed on me in a way I wasn't expecting. All I know is that for one brief moment on that trail, everything beautiful around me stopped feeling beautiful. It felt like the place remembered something terrible, and for some reason, my body remembered it too. I lived in this little duplex out near the woods when I was a kid, but only for about 2 years. And honestly, I don't remember much from that place. Not because nothing happened there, but because that whole stretch of my life was heavy, blurry. The kind of time your brain quietly folds up and puts away somewhere dark. My mom's sister, my Auntie Lena, had passed away from cancer not long before. A few months later, my baby sister was born early, and she was really sick. Nobody knew if she was going to make it. My parents were barely holding themselves together. My dad was deep in addiction, and my mom was just trying to survive, medicated and numb, moving through the days like she was underwater. My little sister was named after my aunt, too, which made everything feel even more tender and painful. And if it hadn't been for my granny stepping in, I really believe my sisters and I might have ended up in foster care. I even failed first grade while we were living there. So when I say I don't remember much, I mean it feels like trying to look through fogged glass. This was more than 20 years ago. Anyway, not long ago, my older sister and I were talking about that duplex. We were remembering how strange it felt there, how creepy some of the nights were, and she brought up something that I had completely forgotten. A memory I guess my mind had buried so well that when she said it, I just sat there thinking, wait, what? There were 3 duplexes out there, tucked back near the bush across from the town airport. Ours was the closest to the main road. The one farthest down had a young brother and sister living in it, and my sisters and I became friends with them. They ended up moving away while we were still living in our place, but before they left, my mom let us sleep over at their house one night. I don't remember much about playing there during the day. I just remember the feeling of that house. It made me uneasy, not in a way I could explain as a kid, just this quiet wrongness sitting in the corners. That night, I slept in the little girl's bunk bed. She was on the bottom bunk, and I was on the top. I don't remember where my sisters slept. I only remember being up there, feeling way too close to the ceiling, like the room was pressing down on me. At some point, I fell asleep. Then I woke up suddenly, and right away, I felt watched. Not just scared from a dream, not confused, watched. I was lying there under the blanket, completely frozen. The bunk bed was lined up with the doorway, so if I turned my head and looked over the edge, I could see straight out into the hall. And I remember feeling this pull toward the doorway, almost like my eyes were being dragged there. I didn't want to look. Every part of me was screaming not to look. I hid under the blanket, shaking, heart pounding so hard it felt like my whole body was buzzing. There's something about being a kid under a blanket that makes you think nothing can touch you there. Like cotton has magic in it. I stayed like that for as long as I could, but that feeling didn't go away. Eventually, I peeked. At first, everything was almost completely black. There was just a little bit of light coming in from the window near the foot of the bed, barely enough to see the room. I looked toward the window first, and everything seemed normal. Then my eyes moved to the doorway, and I saw something there. It looked almost like heat waves, or that weird shimmer you see above a barbecue when propane hits the air. It was thin and distorted at first. Then it started becoming more solid, turning into this faint white smoke. And then I realized it had a shape. A head. A body. Legs. Within a second, it looked like my Auntie Lena. That's the part that still bothers me, because she didn't look like the healthy version of herself. She looked the way I remembered her after chemo. She had on this blue coat, and she had her head wrap. I remember those details so clearly. The smoky white shape sort of shifted into color, and then there she was. As soon as I understood what I was seeing, I rolled onto my back and started sobbing. I didn't scream. I didn't climb down. I just stared at the ceiling and cried as quietly as I could, trying to breathe, trying to calm myself down. It felt like I lay there for hours. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember is later on, telling my older sister what had happened. She told my mom in the car on the way home, but I don't remember my mom's reaction. I don't even remember that conversation clearly. And then, somehow, I forgot the whole thing. Completely. When my sister reminded me years later, it hit me like a punch in the stomach. She said, "Remember when you saw Auntie Lena at the neighbor's house?" And I was just staring at her like, "What are you talking about?" Then she explained it. The sleepover, the bunk bed, what I told her the next morning. And all at once, the memory came back. Not slowly, not in pieces. It flooded in, and suddenly I was that scared little kid again, lying in the top bunk, staring at the doorway. Ever since then, I've gone back and forth about what it was. Part of me wonders if it really was my auntie. Another part of me thinks maybe I was just a traumatized kid, surrounded by grief and fear, and my brain created something out of all that darkness. Maybe I saw what I was most afraid of. Or maybe I saw what I missed. I don't know. The hardest part is that if it was her, I hate thinking she appeared to me still looking sick. But then again, maybe that was the only version of her my child mind could recognize. Maybe if there was something there, It came through in the only shape I knew. I still don't have an answer. I only know that the fear I felt that night was real. The memory, once it came back, felt real. And whether it was my auntie, my imagination, or some strange little doorway grief opened in my mind, I don't think I'll ever fully shake it. I was probably around 11 when all of this happened. My family had just moved into this new house, and honestly, at first, I loved everything about it. The backyard felt massive to me. My bedroom was bigger than any room I'd had before, and we even had a fireplace, which made the whole place feel warm and kind of magical. For a while, I really thought we had found the perfect home. But then, I started noticing something. It was this shadowy figure, always just at the edge of my vision. I'd see it for a split second, turn my head, and it would be gone. At first, I tried to brush it off. You know, little kid imagination, weird lighting, things like that. But my family had always said I had a strange sensitivity when it came to seeing or feeling things. So, part of me knew I shouldn't completely ignore it. It kept happening for a while, just quick glimpses here and there. And then one night, it changed. I was in the living room with my mom and my younger sister, and we were all watching TV together. I got up to use the bathroom, and I left the bathroom door open. From where I was sitting, I could see straight down the hallway into the living room. The kitchen was off to the side, and my bedroom was close by, right near the bathroom. While I was in there, I saw the shadow figure again. But this time, it didn't vanish. It came out from the kitchen and moved right across the hallway, directly in front of the bathroom door. Then it turned so sharply and went straight into my bedroom. And the speed of it was what scared me the most. It didn't move like a normal person. It was unnaturally fast, almost like something from a vampire show, but I could still clearly see it. It wasn't just a blur. It was there. I completely froze. Then I ran back into the living room, half-dressed and panicking, trying to tell my mom and sister what I had just seen. I could barely get the words out because I was so scared. After that night, I still caught little glimpses sometimes, but nothing ever happened as clearly or as terrifyingly as that. About a year later, my older sister Marissa got her first apartment. She was around 19, and she invited us over for a sleepover. Later that night, things had calmed down, and I was lying on her bed waiting for my other sister to finish showering so we could play Monopoly. Marissa walked past the bedroom, glanced in, and then suddenly stopped. She backed up slowly and just stared at me with this worried look on her face. She had always been very into spirits and paranormal things. She used to visit graveyards with her friends and believed she could sense things too. At first, she didn't really explain what was going on. She just started cleansing the apartment, and then she cleansed me too. After she finished, she finally told me what she had seen. She said there had been a shadow figure hovering above me, up in the corner of the room near the bed. She said it felt dark, evil even. And then she told me I didn't need to worry about that shadow figure anymore. The strangest part is that Marissa had lived with my dad, so she didn't know anything about what I had been seeing in that house. I had never told her about that awful night in the bathroom, or the thing that ran into my room. But after she cleansed me, I never saw it again. I'm 25 now, and I still think about it sometimes. It still gives me chills, because the idea that something like that might have been following me when I was just a kid is honestly terrifying. And part of me still wonders, what would have happened if my sister hadn't stepped in that night? Hi. I want to tell you about something that happened when I was a kid, something I've carried with me for years. It's been more than a decade now, and even after all this time, I still don't have a clean explanation for what my sister and I saw that day. I was about 12 when I went to stay with my grandmother in a quiet village in western Ukraine. She had this beautiful little garden behind her house, full of flower beds she cared for like they were family. She loved flowers, especially the first ones that came up in spring. So one morning, when the snowdrops had just started blooming, she asked me to go into the forest and bring some back for her. My older sister, Katerina, came with me. She was 19 then, and honestly, I was glad she was there. The forest wasn't terribly far, but to reach it, you had to cross a wide field that climbed sharply uphill. At the top of that slope, the trees began. Before the field, we passed a few houses standing away from the rest of the village, and then we came by an old abandoned military base. That place already had a bad feeling to it. Broken concrete, rusted metal, empty buildings with dark windows, and that strange kind of silence that makes every small sound feel too loud. We wandered around there for a little while, just being nosy and careless the way kids can be. Then we kept going toward the forest. But there was one place on that hillside that always felt different. About halfway up the slope, there was a mound of land pushing out from the hill, almost like it didn't belong there. In the middle of it stood 3 enormous oak trees, arranged in a near-perfect triangle. I remember looking at them even before anything happened and feeling uncomfortable, though I couldn't have told you why. The air around them just felt heavy. We reached the forest, picked a basket full of snowdrops, and started heading back down through the field. On the way, I noticed small clumps of dry grass or straw scattered all over the ground. I started stepping on them for fun, just crunching them under my shoes. My sister looked at me and said, very seriously, "Stop doing that. You might wake something." I laughed it off. I thought she was just trying to scare me. But a few minutes later, as we were walking downhill, I suddenly felt something change. It was this sharp, cold feeling, like someone was standing behind us and staring straight into my back. I don't know why, but I had to turn around. So I did. I looked back toward the hill with the 3 oak trees, and there, right between them, I saw a woman. Except she wasn't standing, she was floating. She wore a long white dress, and her black hair hung down over her face so completely that I couldn't see any features at all. She was just suspended there between those trees, not touching the ground, not moving like a normal person would move, just hanging in the air. For a second, my mind tried to make it into something ordinary. A branch, a cloth, a trick of light, anything. I blinked several times, but she stayed there. Then I grabbed my sister's arm and whispered for her to look. I'll never forget what happened to her face. Her eyes went wide, wider than I had ever seen them, and her whole body stiffened. Then her hand started shaking in mine. She didn't scream. She barely made a sound. She just whispered, "Run!" And we ran. We tore down that field as fast as we could, the basket bouncing, flowers flying everywhere behind us. I looked back once while we were running, only a few seconds later. There was nothing there anymore. The space between the oaks was empty. We didn't stop until we were far from the hill, maybe a kilometer away. By then, we had lost almost all the snowdrops. We were breathless, shaken, and too scared to even argue about what we had seen. When we got back and told our grandmother, her face changed. She said that during World War II, people had been tortured and killed near those 3 oak trees. According to her, Jews and Ukrainians had been executed there by German soldiers. That stayed with me. What stayed with me even more is that, years later, I began hearing similar stories from other people. One friend told me she once stayed at a country house near a forest. Late at night, she stepped out onto the balcony and saw a white figure in the distance, a woman with long, dark hair moving between the trees. But she said the same thing we had seen. It didn't look like walking. It looked like floating. I still don't know what we saw that day. Some people might call it a banshee. Others would say witch, spirit, restless soul. or just some dark energy left behind by terrible things. I don't know. All I know is that the fear I felt on that hillside was real. The silence, the trees, that white figure between them, my sister's shaking hand in mine, all of it stayed with me. And even now, whenever I think about those 3 oak trees, I feel that same cold pressure in my chest. So I have to ask, has anyone else ever seen something like that? I know how this is going to sound, and honestly, I've wondered plenty of times if I'm just imagining things. My family says I'm probably exhausted, that I'm not sleeping enough, and maybe that would be easier to believe if this kind of thing happened to me everywhere. But it doesn't. I've stayed in other homes. I've lived in other places. And nothing has ever felt the way it feels at my mom's house. I'm 24 now, but I've been seeing and hearing things since I was little, maybe around 6 or 7. The house I grew up in was badly haunted. There's no softer way to put it. Then, when I was 16, my parents moved us into a newer house. The house itself wasn't old, but we never really knew much about the land it was built on. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I went away to college. Every now and then, my mom and stepdad would leave town, and I'd come back to watch the house and take care of their 3 little dogs. So it would just be me there, alone, with the dogs. One night, I was lying on the couch. It was late, somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning. The dogs were settled around me, and the house was quiet. Then I heard tiny footsteps on the stairs behind me. Not a creak, not the house settling. Footsteps. I turned around, expecting to see one of the dogs, or something, anything. But there was nothing there. The next night, I told myself I was going to bed early. It was around 11, and I remember thinking, just a few more minutes, then I'll go upstairs. Then I heard the dog's kennel slam shut. It was loud enough that I immediately thought one of them had gone inside it. But when I looked beside me, all 3 dogs were right there on the couch. I didn't even get up to check. I just lay down fast, pulled the blanket over myself, and stayed still. The room had this awful feeling, like something was standing there, watching me. Years later, I was up late sketching in the living room. The house was quiet again. Then I heard footsteps coming down the carpeted stairs, followed by this wet little slap sound on the hardwood beside me. I looked. Nothing. Another time, I was home alone watching a documentary about Judith Barcy, the little girl who voiced Anne Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Before the video even ended, a framed photo that had been hanging on the wall for years suddenly fell. No one touched it. No door slammed. It just dropped. For a while, I moved away. Then one weekend, I came home to visit, and my mom told me something had happened to her. She said she had been asleep when a man yelled at her. It woke her up, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a man standing at her bedroom door. Then he turned, walked away, and disappeared. About 2 weeks after that, I was taking a nap in my old room. It was the middle of the day. When I woke up, I saw someone walk past my doorway. At first, I thought it was my stepdad. But then the man stopped, leaned his head into my room, and walked toward me. He didn't walk around my desk. He walked through it. Then he vanished. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't make out his face clearly. He just looked like a regular man. And I know what people usually say, but I don't have sleep paralysis. I could move. I was awake. It was daylight. I waited a little while because I wanted to see if my stepdad would actually pass by my door. Eventually, he did. I asked him if he had looked into my room earlier, even though I already knew the answer. He said no. My mom also says she hears someone walking around in my old bedroom, which is right above hers. One night, I was heading upstairs to my room, and I saw a figure standing across the hall in another bedroom doorway. At first, I tried to explain it away. I told myself it was just the lights making a shape. But the next night, I looked again. The shape wasn't there. There are also nights when I'm lying in bed, and I swear I hear the TV on downstairs. Voices, low and muffled, like someone left it playing. But when I open my door, the house is silent. Recently, I moved back home. I don't really sleep in my room anymore. I sleep in my mom's room because mine scares me too much, and she doesn't sleep in the same room as my stepdad anyway. I've tried a few times to sleep in my own bed again, but lately, it's gotten strange. One night, I was lying there on my phone when I suddenly felt someone rub my back. I left immediately. Another morning, when it was already light outside, I was still half asleep when I felt someone stroke my leg. I was so tired that I just ignored it and went back to sleep. Then it happened again the next day. And tonight, I left my room because I felt my hair move. That was enough for me. The reason I think it's connected to the house is because this doesn't follow me everywhere. I've lived in other places. I've stayed in other houses. Only 2 places have ever felt this way, and my mom's house is one of them. And yes, there's a mirror facing my bed. I've tried covering it, but my parents keep taking the cover down. I don't know what's in that house. I just know I don't like being alone in my room anymore. Okay, I'll tell you what happened as clearly as I can. There were 4 of us in the car that night. Me, Arun, driving. My girlfriend, Pia, was in the passenger seat. Rohan was in the back, doing what he always did, talking non-stop. And beside him was Sanika, his older sister. Sanika was usually gentle, easy to laugh with. But that night, she was quiet. She just kept looking out at the road, almost like she was waiting for something to appear. We were driving back from a wedding in Jaisalmer. It was a long drive, around 300 kilometers, and we started much later than we should have. By the time we got onto the highway, it was close to midnight. Around 2:30 in the morning, the road became empty in a way that felt wrong. No shops, no houses, no trucks. Not even dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Just the headlights stretching forward and darkness pressing in from every side. Then, at 2:49 a.m., we reached a crossroads. I only saw it for a second. Something was lying in the middle of the junction. Small, dark, arranged too carefully to be random. Rohan saw it just before I did. He said, "Arun, wait." But I couldn't stop in time. The front tire went over it. The sound it made still bothers me. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It was soft, almost delicate, like cloth tearing underwater. But somehow, I knew we had broken something we were never supposed to touch. Pia sucked in a breath beside me. I slowed down and asked, "What was that?" Before anyone could answer, Sanika said from the back seat, "Don't stop. Keep driving." There was no panic in her voice, no fear, just this flat, empty certainty. So I kept driving. For a while, nobody said anything. Later, Pia told me what she saw when she looked back through the rear window. There was a red circle painted on the road. In the center was a clay lamp, turned upside down, with smoke still rising from the wick. Around it was a black thread tied with knots, and there was a folded note lying beside it. She didn't tell us then. I think she was afraid that saying it out loud would make it real. The first strange thing was the GPS. It said the next town was 47 kilometers away. Then we passed a milestone that said the same thing. 47 kilometers. 7 or 8 minutes later, we passed it again. Same faded paint. Same crack through the number 4. I tried to explain it away. I told myself maybe there were 2 signs. Maybe I was tired. Then the radio came on. The radio wasn't even connected. I had pulled the cable out earlier because the signal kept cutting in and out, but a song started playing anyway. It was an old devotional song, sung by a woman with a cracked voice. It played for maybe half a minute, then stopped. Then it started again from the beginning. Sanika whispered, "I know that song." Rohan asked her how. She said, "They played it outside my grandmother's house after she died." After that, the car felt colder. At 3:06, we saw a dog on the left side of the road. It was dead, lying on its side with a wound across its back. We drove past it. A few minutes later, there it was again. Same dog, same wound, same position. I told Pia it had to be another dog. The third time we saw it, it was sitting upright, facing us. I don't like remembering what happened after that. There was a figure standing on the right side of the road. Tall. Too tall. It had its back to us and didn't move at all, even when we passed close enough that the air from the car should have shifted its clothes. I checked the mirror. There was nothing there. Then Pia grabbed my arm so hard her nails went into my skin. She was pointing at the back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror. Rohan was there. Sanika was there. And between them, there was something else. I don't know how to describe it without sounding insane. It had the shape of a person, kind of. A head, shoulders, a body. But the face was blank. Not covered, not hidden. Just smooth skin where the face should have been. Pia was the only one who could see it clearly. Rohan was still talking, and Sanika kept staring through the windshield like she already knew it was there. I looked back at the road and didn't check the mirror again. A little later, Rohan disappeared. He had been mid-sentence. He was telling some story from the wedding, something about his cousin dropping a tray of sweets. Then he just stopped. Not slowly, not like he got distracted. He stopped as if someone had cut the sound out of him. We somehow reached a red light, which makes no sense because there are no traffic lights on that stretch of highway. But I stopped, turned around, and Rohan's seat was empty. His snack packet was still there, placed neatly in the middle of the seat. I touched the seat. It was warm. The door had never opened. Pia had been staring at it the whole time after she saw that thing sitting between them. There were other things after that. The phones all showing different times. A car that looked exactly like mine appearing ahead of us, then rolling backward toward us with no driver inside. Pia trying to scream and no sound coming out. But the part I think about most is what Sanika did. She asked me to pull over. Her voice was soft then, sad almost. She told us that what we drove over at the crossroads was a kind of trap, something left there during a ritual. She said it was meant to catch a soul, maybe a particular one, maybe anyone unlucky enough to cross the boundary. She said when we drove through it, we carried it with us. Then she said something that still makes my chest hurt. She said, "It was calling me from the beginning." Her phone had died the moment we crossed that place. She said she understood then, but she hoped she was wrong. She opened the door. I begged her not to. She looked at me and said, "Don't stop. Don't look back. Just drive until the road ends." Then she stepped out, and I drove. I hate saying that, but I drove. 12 minutes later, the road opened onto a main highway. There were streetlights, a petrol station, a man sweeping near the pumps like it was the most ordinary night in the world. The time was 3:16 a.m. Sanika's seat was empty. Her phone was lying there, unlocked. The battery showed 100%. On the screen was a map I had never seen before. Not Google Maps, not any app I recognized. It showed one thin road, just one. And on that road, there was a blue dot, moving. At the petrol station, the man looked into our car for a long time. Then he asked, "Were there 3 of you or 4?" I told him 3. He didn't believe me. I could see that. He handed me the bottle of water I had asked for, but his eyes stayed on the back seat. Rohan is still missing. The police report says he was last seen at the wedding venue. There's no camera footage of our car on that highway. No record of the road we took. I've searched every map I can find, satellite images, local surveys, everything. That road doesn't exist. But Sanika's phone still works. The battery has never dropped below 100%. And the blue dot is still moving. So this happened last August, and honestly, I still think about it more often than I'd like. At the time, my boyfriend and I had only been together a few months, and we were both desperate for a little escape. We live abroad most of the year, and even though we're from the same country, our hometowns are nowhere near each other. When summer comes around, we usually both head back home, and that's the only long stretch where being together feels easy. He was under a ton of pressure with work. He had one of those jobs he could mostly do remotely, but he was stuck managing a project that was turning into a nightmare. I wasn't doing much better. I'd recently lost my father, and I was buried in paperwork and family responsibilities, just completely emotionally drained. So I said, forget it. Let's go to my family's summer house for a few days. Nothing fancy, just somewhere quiet where we could breathe and be in the same place for a while. He loved the idea, and we went. The house is in this tiny village in the south, really remote, surrounded by olive groves and citrus trees. It's peaceful in a way that almost feels unreal. The sea is about 25 minutes away, and the village itself is small enough that everything sort of revolves around one square. Right across from the house, there's a playground. When I was little, that was the center of my world. There's an old school building beside it, an open square where the village festival happens every year, and behind all that, lower down the slope, there's a little olive grove and this utility building that powers the lights around the square. That part matters later. Anyway, we got there, settled in, and the first day was completely normal. The next day we worked, went swimming in the afternoon, had dinner out, and came back late. It was close to midnight by then. Now, one thing to know is that my aunt's house is right next to ours, and things between us have been for years. Because of that, we were being kind of discreet whenever we stepped outside. I just didn't want to deal with being seen or judged. So, in what felt like a harmless little nostalgic idea, I said, "Why don't we go sit on the swings for a bit?" It was late, no one was around, and I thought it might be nice to relive a little piece of childhood. At first, it actually was nice. Quiet, warm, completely still. We sat on the swings talking softly, just enjoying the emptiness of the place. I noticed my aunt's porch light was on, and I figured she might have spotted us, but I tried not to care. Then, after a while, we moved over to this little play structure with a slide. It was farther back, closer to the school building, and not as well lit. We weren't doing anything strange, by the way. We were literally just two tired adults sitting on a children's play structure because it felt funny and harmless. I was facing toward the grove and that utility building. My boyfriend was facing more toward the houses. I remember glancing back and noticing my aunt's porch light had gone off. And for a second, I actually felt relieved. I thought, great, finally a little privacy. Then, maybe 10 seconds later, everything changed. I can't explain it in any logical way. There was no scream, no footsteps, no movement I could point to. But suddenly, every instinct in my body went rigid. It felt like fear dropped into me all at once. Not nerves, not unease, pure danger. The kind that makes your stomach turn cold. And the worst part was, my boyfriend felt it too. We looked at each other, and neither of us had to say it. We both knew something was wrong. When we were at the swings, part of the play structure blocked the view of us. But where we were sitting then, we were completely exposed. If anyone was there, they could see us clearly. I still don't know how we managed not to run. We got down as calmly as we could and started heading back. There was a little ladder on the side facing the grove, and both of us instinctively avoided it. Instead, we climbed down the slide itself because it faced the exit. The whole time, I kept staring at the school windows, convinced I was about to see a face looking back at me. I never stopped glancing over my shoulder until we were out of the square and back on the road. My house was only a few steps away by then, so I should have felt safe. But I didn't. I felt like we needed to get inside immediately, like something terrible would happen if we didn't. We made it back, locked up, and only then did we admit how scared we both were. What gets me even now is that there was no visible threat. I never actually saw anyone. I didn't hear anyone either. I just knew something was there, and to me, it felt like a person. More specifically, it felt like a man. I know that sounds strange, but it was such a strong impression that I still remember it. My boyfriend pointed out something else that made it worse. He said the whole place had gone completely silent. Even the faint rustling we'd heard earlier had stopped. It was like everything had gone still at once. And I couldn't stop thinking about the timing. The moment my aunt's light went out, that feeling hit me. It left me with this awful thought that whoever was out there knew no one was watching anymore. Maybe that was paranoia. Maybe. But it still doesn't sit right with me. The next morning, we were both trying to act normal, though neither of us really was. We talked ourselves into believing maybe it had just been nerves, or exhaustion, or one of those weird instinctive moments people sometimes get for no reason. So that evening we went out again for dinner, just to get out of the house for a while. We weren't gone long, maybe a few hours. When we came back, my boyfriend parked on the sloped driveway, and I went ahead to open the gate. The entrance is a little awkward, and there's a drainage channel at the bottom near the incline, so you don't really see that part until you're right there. I got close to the gate and suddenly stopped. There was a cat lying on the drain. At first, I thought it was asleep, but something looked wrong immediately. It wasn't moving at all. There was no blood, no sign it had been hit, nothing to suggest it had wandered there and died naturally in that exact position. It looked placed. That's the only word I have for it. I yelped, and my boyfriend came running over. The second he saw it, his whole expression changed. He stepped in front of me, opened the gate quickly, and told me to go inside. Later, once we were upstairs, he told me it didn't look like roadkill to him. He grew up spending summers in the countryside, so he'd seen enough dead animals to know the difference. He said it looked staged, and that it had likely been dead for hours already. There was no way to prove that, of course. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it really had crawled there somehow. But after the night before, it felt impossible to brush off. Nothing else happened after that. We stayed the rest of the trip, and strangely enough, the remaining days were calm. We even went back again later that summer and had a lovely time. Since then, I've returned with my mother a few times, and nothing remotely similar has happened. Still, I've never looked at that playground the same way again. I always scan the square now, the school, the grove, that little building behind it. I've never felt that same terror since, but I haven't forgotten it either. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that both of us felt it at the exact same moment, and that is the part I can't explain away. So when I tell you it felt real, I mean it really did. And whatever was out there that night, I hope I never meet it again. So I do house sitting pretty often. It's never been my full-time job or anything, just one of those side gigs that sort of grew on its own. I started back in high school after I got my first car, And over the years, once a few people trusted me, their friends started calling too. Before long, I somehow became the person people think of when they need someone to watch their house. Honestly, I can't complain. It's simple work, and the extra money is nice. That's how I ended up at this house. One of the families I sit for recommended me to an older couple they know. They're probably in their late 50s, maybe early 60s, and they raise and show dogs. Not casually either. I mean actual competition dogs that travel for shows, run courses, win ribbons, that whole world. Their place sits on a bigger piece of land because they train the dogs there. The backyard stretches out into this dry, open desert property with fenced-off areas, jumps, tunnels, weave poles, all of it. It feels quiet, but not isolated. There are other houses across the road and farther down, so it's not like I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere. This was only my 4th time staying there, and to be fair, the last couple of times, I hadn't stayed overnight every single night. Usually I'd come by after work, take care of everything, and then leave for my evening classes before heading back to my apartment. So I knew the house, but I still wasn't fully settled into it the way you get when you've spent a lot of nights somewhere. Up until this trip, though, it had all been completely normal. Feed the dogs, bring in the mail, water a few plants, sleep, repeat. Easy. The couple have grown kids, but they live out of state now, so when the owners travel, they just have someone stay at the house. This time, they left 2 dogs with me. The older female was named Greta before, but let's call her Greta here, and the younger male was Otto, so I'll call him Owen. Greta is older, around 9, and she has this calm, gentle presence. She mostly naps, trails behind me from room to room, and acts like a retired queen. Sweet dog, but definitely protective of her space. Owen is younger and full of energy. He follows me everywhere. If I stand up, he stands up. Total Velcro dog. And neither of them are timid. That's important. Owen will bark at anything outside. Seriously, if a car rolls by on the road, he notices it before I do. And Greta, for all her sweetness, is not the kind of dog who just freezes up. That's why this started feeling strange. The first 2 nights were fine. Then on the 3rd night, I woke up sometime after 1 in the morning because I heard Greta whining. Not barking, just that low, uneasy whine. When I stepped out of the guest room, both dogs were in the living room, staring at the sliding glass door that looks out into the backyard. At first, I figured it was probably a coyote. That happens out there sometimes, so it wouldn't have been unusual. But the way they were acting felt off. Usually Owen would be right up against the glass, barking his head off. Instead, both of them were just sitting there, completely still, staring. I turned on the backyard light and looked outside, but I didn't see anything. No animal, no movement, nothing. After a minute or two, Greta finally laid back down. Owen copied her, and I went back to bed. The next night, it happened again. This time I was awake, sitting on the couch with my laptop, half watching a show. Both dogs lifted their heads at exactly the same moment and looked toward the glass door again. Owen stood up and walked a little closer, but he stopped several feet back. No barking, no scratching at the glass. He just stood there, focused, like he was trying to make sense of something in the dark. After a couple of minutes, they both eased up again, like whatever had caught their attention was gone. Then last night was the one that really got under my skin. I woke up around 2 because Owen was pacing. Not frantically, just this slow back and forth between the couch and the sliding door. Greta was sitting upright again, stiff and completely locked on the glass. When I came into the room, Owen moved over and stood next to me, but neither of them looked at me. They were still focused outside. I pulled the curtain back a little farther and tried to see into the yard, but past the reach of the outside light, it was just darkness. Nothing moving, no sound except for Greta's quiet whimpering. And then she did something that honestly made my stomach drop a little. She stood up very slowly and started backing away from the door without taking her eyes off it, like she didn't want to turn her back on whatever she thought was out there. I know that probably sounds dramatic, but in the moment, it felt deeply wrong. Animals have instincts we don't, and watching her move like that hit me in a way I can't fully explain. Eventually, Owen gave up and lay back down, so I told myself it had to be some animal passing through that I just couldn't see. This morning, I texted the owners and asked if animals come through the yard often, because the dogs kept reacting to something outside at night. The owner said coyotes pass through now and then, which I already knew, and she added that their dogs are very alert and might just be hearing something I can't. And honestly, that makes sense. It probably does explain it. But I'll be real with you, it still left me uneasy. Not because I immediately thought it was something paranormal. I didn't. It was more because I'm a woman alone in someone else's house, in the middle of the night, and both dogs were clearly focused on something outside that I couldn't see. Whether it's an animal or not, that doesn't exactly make you feel better in the moment. Greta and Owen weren't acting curious. They looked scared. And even when your logical brain says, it's probably nothing but wildlife, there's always that tiny part of you that goes, okay, but what if it isn't? I checked every door and window after that. Every lock, twice. Part of why I'm even second-guessing myself now is because my friends have been absolutely no help. A lot of them are into spiritual stuff, paranormal stories, all of that. Some of them swear they've dealt with spirits or mimics before. I don't really live in that world, and I've never had experiences like that myself. And honestly, if something truly paranormal were happening, I feel like I'd be noticing more than this. Weird sounds inside the house, objects moving, something unmistakable. But none of that is happening. It's only the dogs. Just the dogs reacting to something outside that I can't see. So I still think the most likely answer is that some animal is crossing through the yard at night, and the dogs are picking up on it before I can. That's the explanation that makes the most sense. Still, the part I can't shake is how both of them react at exactly the same time, every time. They both suddenly go still and look toward that door together. And it always seems to happen somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. And I know that probably means nothing. But when you're standing there in a dark house, watching two normally confident dogs stare into the black like they see something you can't, it's hard not to feel that little chill crawl up your spine. I do not really talk back to strange things anymore. I used to, but not now. A while back, I was sleeping in a room my dad and I put together out in the garage. I live with my mother because I take care of her, and that little room opened into the laundry room, so once the door was shut, it always felt tucked away and separate from the rest of the house. At the time, my cat had just had kittens, and I had set up this covered crate for her in my room so she'd have somewhere quiet and dark. Later, once the kittens were old enough, I moved all of them out, but I left the crate there longer than I should have. I had a big bed, and I figured I'd deal with it later. The opening of that crate was turned toward me when I slept. That's when the strange stuff really started. Almost every night, when I would lie down and try to fall asleep, I would feel movement behind me on the bed. It felt like something small and careful, almost like an animal walking around, or sometimes like hands lightly feeling along the edge of the mattress. I still think it felt more like an animal than anything human. The second I turned to look, it would stop. After several nights of that, I got so unsettled that I started sleeping flat on my back with the light on, because for some reason it never happened if I was on my back. Eventually, I got used to it enough that instead of whipping around every time, I started saying, "Please don't do that. I'm trying to sleep. At least wait until I'm already asleep." And usually, that worked. Then one night, I said it again, just like I always did. and from the darkness inside that crate, I heard a woman's voice say, very clearly, "Why?" I froze. My eyes locked right onto that dark opening, and I said, "Because I'm trying to sleep, and whatever this is, it's making me feel unsafe in a room where I'm supposed to feel safe." While I was saying that, I reached for the light switch without taking my eyes off the crate. Nothing answered me after that, but I got rid of the crate immediately, and for the next few nights, I kept the light on. Even after I moved into a different room, I still sometimes felt that same movement on the bed. Not often, but enough. I stopped speaking to it. Now if it happens, I just lie on my back and wait for it to stop. The other thing that happened was even harder to explain. One night, I had been awake for maybe half an hour, just lying in bed and listening to my mom moving around in the kitchen. My room opened into the laundry room, and from there you could get to the kitchen, so I was listening to make sure she was okay and didn't need help. Then my door opened. A woman stood there in the doorway. She looked maybe mid-20s, maybe a little older. I'm terrible at guessing age. But I know she wasn't anyone I recognized. No other women lived in that house besides my mother. She just stood there staring at me. And when I looked directly at her, when our eyes met, her whole expression changed. She smiled. Her eyes lit up like she was excited, like she was genuinely happy that I could see her. Then she jumped at me. She launched herself straight onto the bed. I felt the impact. I felt the weight hit the mattress, and then she was gone. I had been fully awake for at least 30 minutes, probably longer. I was not dreaming. Believe me, I tried to tell myself that's all it was. I wanted it to be that simple. But it's harder to explain it away when you've already felt things walking across your bed, or shaking it hard enough to wake you fully, or leaving impressions in the mattress like something with feet had been standing there. What has stayed with me most is that smile. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel threatening at first. It felt more like she was thrilled that I noticed her, like she had been there longer than I realized, waiting for me to finally look back. Let me tell you about something that happened to me a couple of mornings ago, because I still can't quite shake it. I had to be at work absurdly early, around 5:15, and since my car's been hanging on by a thread lately, I left the house at about 4:20 and walked. The route I take cuts between a housing estate and the edge of the woods, then climbs along the main road for about a mile. It's a steep walk too, no real flat stretch to speak of, and that morning it was freezing, somewhere around -2, so I gave myself extra time even though I can usually make it in under an hour. Right from the start, I felt uneasy. That road isn't exactly pleasant even in daylight, and that morning the fog was so thick I could barely see a few yards ahead of me. Everything looked swallowed up. You know when the world goes strangely quiet, but somehow that makes every little sound feel louder. It was like that. As I got closer to the road, I noticed I could hear the river far louder than I should have been able to. Normally you have to get well into the woods before it becomes noticeable, but this time I could hear it from much farther off. At first, I blamed the heavy rain from the day before, which seemed reasonable enough, but the odd thing was that the sound didn't fade the way it should have. It almost felt like it was keeping pace with me, even as I moved away from the trees. Once I reached the main road and started seeing the occasional car pass, I settled a little. Not much, but enough to stop imagining every shadow had a pulse. Then, I heard these strange bird calls coming from the wooded side of the road. They sounded completely unfamiliar, which bothered me more than I want to admit. I live near woodland, I work in conservation, and even if I'm hopeless at naming sounds on the spot, I've usually heard most things at least once. This was different, wrong somehow. And that was when I got that awful feeling. You probably know the one I mean, that creeping certainty that something is watching you. Not just nerves, not just your imagination running wild, but that deep physical instinct that tells you you're not alone. I've only really felt it like that before when someone actually was following me. So by that point, I was tense enough that I was halfway ready to run the last stretch, even though my legs were already aching from pushing uphill. I kept walking, kept checking behind me, kept listening to the woods on my left, trying to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe some person lurking about, maybe someone off their head, maybe just a strange animal call bouncing oddly in the fog. I was trying very hard to stay practical. Then, completely out of nowhere, this animal stepped onto the path ahead of me. The closest thing I can compare it to is a fox crossed with a dog, but even that doesn't feel right. It came out halfway into the road, and then, without pausing, without looking at me, without making a sound, it turned and went straight back into the woods. And listen, I was already rattled, so that alone nearly stopped my heart. But what really got me was the way it moved. No hesitation, no pause, no rustling, no scraping, no noise at all. It didn't creep through the fence, didn't squeeze, didn't even seem to slow down. It just appeared, crossed, and vanished. My first thought was that maybe it was a stray dog and there was some gap in the fence I'd never noticed before. But when I reached the spot, the fence looked completely normal. And this thing wasn't tiny. It looked bigger than a fox by a fair bit, more the size of a shepherd mix maybe, so there's no way it should have slipped through like that without effort, and definitely not in total silence. I was terrified, properly terrified. Not in a dramatic way, just that raw, physical kind of fear that floods your chest and makes your eyes sting before you even realize it. And what was strangest of all was that it didn't feel malicious exactly. I didn't get the sense it wanted to hurt me. It was more like I'd brushed up against something I wasn't meant to understand. Where I'm from, the old stories about black dogs tend to go one of two ways. Either they're a terrible omen, or they're there to guide you, to keep worse things away, to make sure you stay on the road and get where you're meant to go. Since nothing bad happened to me, I've been choosing to believe it was the second kind. My late gran, Maeve, was deeply spiritual, and my sister's much the same. She's always pressing little bits of iron and silver into my hand, telling me to keep them on me just in case. I usually laugh it off, but after that morning, I'm a lot less quick to dismiss things. I've had other strange experiences around the edge of town before, ones that were arguably stranger than this, but I've never felt fear like that just from walking alone. Never. And I can tell you this much, supernatural or not, I understand now why so many people fork out for a taxi before dawn rather than walk that road in the dark. I made it to work safely, and when I checked the time, I'd done a walk that normally takes me close to 50 minutes in a little over half an hour. My legs ached the whole day after, and they were still sore the next morning. So yes, I got there. I was fine. But I still can't explain what I saw, and somehow, that's the part that stays with me most. I'm 25 now, and I've spent most of my life in the same house. I moved in when I was around 12, and for years it was packed with family, my parents, my grandparents, my younger brother, and for a while even my aunt and cousin stayed with us. These days, it's just me, my mom, my dad, and my brother. Ever since I was young, I've been the kind of person who picks up on the feeling of a place really quickly. Back then, our house always felt heavy to me, especially at night. It's an old, spacious house, and once the lights were off, everything felt darker than it should have. I used to avoid walking around after dark unless I absolutely had to. But sometimes I'd need to go to the kitchen for water, and more than once, I saw the same figure standing in the living room. He was tall, completely shadowed, and looked like a man wearing old-fashioned clothes, a brimmed hat, and a long coat. He never rushed at me or made a sound. He would just stand there. I told myself it had to be my imagination, because that felt easier to live with. But one night, something happened that really shook me. I was in the little laundry room where we used to iron clothes, folding things and finishing up for the night. There was an old desktop computer in there, and I'd been watching random videos while I worked. When I turned the monitor off, I caught my reflection in the dark screen, and right behind me, I saw him. Clear as day. That same tall figure, much closer than I'd ever seen him before. I remember my whole body going cold. After that, I stopped going into that room by myself unless I really had to. There was another time when I woke up frozen in bed and saw someone standing near my feet. I don't remember every detail now, just the fear. Later on, my dad reminded me that it really happened because I ran into my parents' room crying so hard I could barely speak. I had almost buried that memory, but hearing him bring it up made it feel real all over again. At some point, I mentioned the man to my grandmother. She was deeply spiritual and very religious, and her response caught me off guard. She said it was her father watching over her. I didn't know what to do with that. It felt strange, but I let it go. Years passed, and eventually I stopped seeing him. I figured maybe I'd outgrown whatever had been going on, or maybe I really had imagined the whole thing. Then a few months ago, everything came rushing back. My cousin, my brother, and I were having dinner together, laughing about old memories, when my cousin suddenly asked, completely casually, whether we remembered the man with the hat in the house when we were younger. I can't even explain what that felt like. My stomach dropped. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. I just stared at him and said, "You saw him too?" Then my brother admitted he'd seen him as well, and my brother is not someone who gets rattled easily. Listening to both of them describe their own experiences was surreal. For so long, I had convinced myself it was all in my head. But hearing them say it out loud made me realize I hadn't been alone in it. None of us had talked about it back then because anything paranormal was basically off limits in our house. What's strange is that the house feels completely different now. The heaviness is gone. It feels calm, almost protected. Every now and then we still catch little things, like the quick shape of children darting around the dining table or crouching underneath it. But it never feels threatening. And sometimes I feel my grandfather's presence in the house too. That part doesn't scare me at all. It actually comforts me. I miss him deeply, and sometimes I talk to him like he's still nearby. Last week, my mom said she saw him standing in the kitchen for a second, and honestly, that made me smile. I like believing he's still around, quietly watching over us. I need to tell you about something that's been happening at my house, because honestly, I still can't make sense of it. My family has never really been the type to jump straight to ghosts or anything paranormal. We do believe there's something after this life, sure, but we're the kind of people who usually explain things away. A door shuts on its own? Draft. Strange noise in the hallway? Old house. That's always been us. But over the past several days, something's been going on that none of us can explain. And it started to really get under my skin. It began one evening about a week ago. It was just me and my mom at home, sitting in the lounge with our German shepherd, Kira. The cat was out in the hallway. Everything felt normal, quiet, nothing unusual at all. Then suddenly, we heard it. 3 loud knocks on the front door. Sharp, deliberate, the kind that makes you stop mid-thought. My mom and I just looked at each other. What made it so strange was that we have this big, heavy metal gate at the top of the driveway, and it makes a racket whenever anyone comes onto the property. You can always hear it. But that time, we hadn't heard a thing. We both got up to check, and right away I noticed Kira was acting completely wrong. She was right behind us, but her ears were pinned back and her tail was tucked between her legs. That's just not like her. Even when unexpected visitors show up, she's usually excited and bouncing around, desperate to say hello. And then the cat bolted. Just tore upstairs like something had terrified her. Later, I found her hiding under my mom's bed, shaking. When we opened the door, there was nobody there. Not a single person. No movement, no sign anyone had been nearby. The gate was still shut. The porch was empty. We even walked the whole property because it's fully fenced, and there was nowhere someone could have gone that quickly without us seeing them. Our nearest neighbor is elderly and moves slowly, so it couldn't have been him. And honestly, I don't see how anyone could have knocked and disappeared in that amount of time. That was the first moment where my mom and I both felt properly unsettled, because we had both heard it, clear as day. So it wasn't one of us imagining things. And for the first time, we didn't have a neat explanation ready. Since that night, things have only gotten stranger. I can't sleep with my bedroom door closed anymore. Whenever I shut it, I swear I hear soft knocking on the other side, like someone tapping just outside. But when I leave the door open, it stops completely. Both the cat and the dog have kept acting oddly too. They'll suddenly hide behind furniture, growl, or hiss at nothing I can see. And that's not their usual behavior at all. They're normally calm, affectionate, and ridiculously friendly. Then there's the voices. My whole family has started hearing one another calling out when the person isn't even there. One day my dad was in the shower after work while my mom and I were out on a walk, and he swore he heard her calling to him from the kitchen. The same thing happens to me when I'm home alone. I'll hear my mom or dad call my name so clearly that I answer back without even thinking. And then I remember, I'm the only one in the house. Tonight was what pushed me to finally talk about it. I'd just come home from work, still standing by the front door with my keys in my hand, when it happened again. 3 loud knocks. So hard the keys actually rattled in the lock. And I just froze. I don't know if I'm letting all of this get into my head. Maybe I'm more anxious than I realize. Maybe there's some explanation we still haven't found. I want there to be one. I really do. So I'm a student at ASU, and this happened last year during my first solo drive back to my hometown in Texas for Thanksgiving break. I was still pretty new to long-distance driving, and without realizing it, I ended up taking US 70 instead of I-10. Total rookie mistake. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the farther I got, the stranger the road started to feel. It was getting dark fast, and being out there alone for the first time, I was already a little on edge. Once I got past the mountains, the drive settled down a bit. It still felt kind of off, but there was something nice about passing through all these tiny towns I'd never seen before. It was just me, the road, and my playlist blasting through the car speakers, trying to stay awake and keep myself calm. Then, right as I was leaving the Safford area, I came over a hill and had to stop almost immediately. There were sparks, chaos, and a commercial semi-truck flipped over in the road. I was the third car to pull up, which meant I had barely missed the crash itself. That realization alone shook me. I rolled my window down, and I heard the guy from the first car run over to the second car yelling for help. He said, "You need to help me. This guy just died." I can't even explain the feeling that hit me in that moment. I was 18, alone, driving across states for the first time, already nervous, and suddenly I'm sitting in the middle of something horrifying. I called my parents right away and told them what had happened. I let them know I was going to be getting home much later than expected. Eventually, the police showed up, traffic started backing up, and one of the deputies came over to my car. He told me the best way to get home was to turn around, take US 191, and reconnect with I-10 from there. So I did. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and I was out on some back road with nothing but my music and my headlights. Honestly, part of it felt peaceful. I was listening to house in trance, and somehow it matched the emptiness of the road perfectly. I was still creeped out from the accident, but the drive had this quiet, surreal feeling to it. Not long after leaving town, near a junction I didn't recognize, I was going maybe 60 since I didn't know the road and there were no lights anywhere. Then out of nowhere, I slammed on my brakes, swerved into the other lane, and started honking. A man had stepped into the road. It was a 2-lane highway, and he could have waited literally a few seconds for me to pass. But what really stuck with me wasn't just that he crossed. It was the way he crossed. He looked rough, like maybe he'd been living on the street, but he didn't react to me at all. Not even a glance. My headlights were probably the only light around for miles. I was braking hard, honking, almost hitting him, and he just kept walking straight ahead like I wasn't even there. No hesitation, no panic, no acknowledgement. Nothing. That's the part I still can't shake. The second I passed him, this awful, eerie feeling came over me. I remember gripping the steering wheel and just wanting to get off that road as fast as possible. I never took US 70 again after that, at least not by choice. Then later on, I found out that US 191 used to be US 666, and a lot of people consider it one of the most haunted highways in the country. When I read that, my stomach seriously dropped. I ended up telling my girlfriend and one of my friends about it, and they both said the same thing, that maybe what I saw wasn't a normal person at all. And honestly, I don't know what to think. Even before I learned any of that, the whole thing already felt wrong in a way I still can't explain. Finding out the road's history just made that feeling stronger. I've lived in West Virginia my whole life, and when I was about 11, my family moved into a different house right before I started middle school. Everything felt new then. New school, new neighborhood, new routine. But I ended up making a close group of friends I still know today. Back then, we were all fascinated by the same kinds of things: ghost stories, haunted places, anything paranormal. It felt exciting at first, like we were stepping into some big mystery without really understanding what we were doing. One of my friends, Kayla, lived just a short drive away, and one weekend she brought over an Ouija board. The second it came out, all of us were curious. We gathered around it like it was some kind of dare, half laughing, half nervous. I still remember how we kept glancing at each other, trying to figure out if one of us was secretly moving the planchette. We even started lifting our fingers off it one at a time to test it. Then, at one point, every single one of us pulled our hands away together, and that thing still slid across the board on its own. We lost it. We screamed and bolted upstairs to where my parents were. We were just kids, scared out of our minds, and in all that panic, we never said goodbye to whatever we had been talking to. Looking back, that was the moment everything seemed to shift. After that night, instead of backing off completely, we kept pushing further. We started looking into other rituals and stumbled across scrying. At the time, it sounded mysterious more than dangerous. We tried staring into a bowl of water first, hoping to see something. And when that didn't seem to work, we decided a mirror might be better. Nothing happened that night, at least not while we were all together. And I remember thinking maybe the whole thing was nonsense. But sometime later, I woke up in the middle of the night and looked toward the mirror in my room. There was a woman standing there. She was pale, almost unnaturally pale, wearing a white nightgown. She had short brown hair, cut in a chin-length bob, and this fixed, heavy stare that seemed to go straight through me. What has always stayed with me is that I didn't feel fear in that first moment. I know how strange that sounds. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I just stared back at her and shifted a little, trying to see if maybe I was somehow looking at my own reflection wrong. but she didn't move with me, not even a little. She stood completely still, her head tilted slightly downward, but her eyes locked on me. Somehow, I fell back asleep. Then it happened again on another night, and this time it was worse. I woke up and saw the same woman in the mirror, but now her neck was bent sharply to one side, and her expression had changed. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked furious or shocked or both. It's hard to describe it exactly, but even now, years later, I can still picture her face with disturbing clarity. And again, for reasons I still can't explain, I didn't feel the kind of fear you'd expect in that moment. Looking back, the only way I know how to make sense of that is to believe God was protecting me somehow. Still, those experiences stayed with me. They changed something in me for good. I've had a deep fear of mirrors ever since, and honestly, I keep my distance from anything connected to trying to contact the other side. I'm in my 20s now, and that fear never really left. What I've shared here is only one part of what happened in that house. There were other things too, more than I can fit into one story, but this part has always haunted me the most. About 6 months after we moved out, something horrible happened at that old house. A homeless woman had been sleeping on the porch, and someone set both her and the house on fire. From what I remember, she didn't survive. I want to say this with full respect for her and for her family, because what happened to her was deeply tragic. But I also remember hearing that the man responsible claimed he felt influenced by something paranormal when he did it. And after everything I experienced in that house, I believed there was something deeply wrong there. I really did. Whatever was in that place felt dark. It felt patient. And I've always been grateful we got out before something happened to us too. So if there's one thing I hope anyone takes from my story, it's this. These things are not games. Tools like Ouija boards, rituals, attempts to reach beyond what we understand, they can open doors you may not know how to close. Curiosity can feel harmless when you're young, but some things carry consequences long after the thrill is gone. I'm a wildlife biology grad student, and until late August of 2023, I never really gave the supernatural much room in my mind. I was helping lead a small student research team at a monkey sanctuary in Central Florida, where we were studying a nocturnal species that was most active well after dark. So our work usually began close to midnight, when the whole place felt like it belonged more to the animals than to us. The sanctuary sat way out on the edge of town, surrounded by acres of dense hardwood forest. There was just one main building where everyone kept supplies, took breaks, and handled veterinary work. Beyond that, it was all trees, trails, and enclosures tucked beneath the canopy. That night started out completely normal. I had our schedule set, our materials ready, and we were moving through the trials like we always did. For this part of the study, we were showing the monkeys printed photos and recording how they responded. Usually they were curious. They'd creep a little closer, settle onto a branch, stare at the image, and make these soft little chirps and calls to each other. But during the second round, something felt off almost immediately. The monkeys in that enclosure weren't behaving the way they normally did. Instead of coming near us, they stayed close to their nesting boxes, tense and still, like they didn't want to be seen. I was sitting there with another researcher, Elise, both of us in folding chairs with red filter flashlights, trying to stay focused on our notes, when I heard it. At first, it was faint. So faint I honestly wondered if I was imagining it. But then, it grew clearer. It was music. Just one instrument, a flute, no singing, no rhythm behind it. Only this thin, drifting melody moving through the trees. I turned slightly, trying to place where it was coming from, but behind us was nothing except darkness and the outline of the woods. Then Elise touched my arm. I looked at her, and her face had gone pale. I asked, "You hear that too?" She nodded, real slow. I checked my watch, and we only had a few minutes left in the trial. I remember thinking, just finish the timer, just stay calm. But the music kept getting louder, and that was the part I couldn't explain away. There was a road nearby, sure, but not close enough for it to sound like that. And if it had been coming from a passing car, it should have faded. Instead, it felt like it was drawing nearer, like someone was standing somewhere inside that fenced property, somewhere in the woods with us. And then I got this terrible feeling. You know that feeling when your whole body suddenly knows something before your mind catches up? It felt like there was something behind me, watching us from the trees. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. I just kept staring ahead, already knowing exactly which patch of darkness it was, near that bent old tree between two enclosures where we always caught our feet on the roots. Elise looked toward me and whispered, very quietly, "Don't turn around." That was the moment everything changed. All the monkeys went silent. There were dozens of them spread across that sanctuary, and all at once the sound just stopped. The pair we were observing disappeared into their nest box completely. No movement, no calls, nothing. The whole forest felt like it had pulled in a breath and refused to let it go. I remember feeling so scared I almost started crying, and at the same time I was trying to reason with myself, trying to force a normal explanation over something that didn't feel normal at all. But deep down, I was certain we were not safe out there. We didn't say a word, and we didn't look back. We just grabbed what we could and ran for the keeper house as fast as we could. Behind us, the flute kept going, louder than before, and then the monkeys erupted. All at once, the whole sanctuary came alive with noise, frantic and sharp and wild. The second we got inside and shut the door, the music was gone. Just gone. The keeper on duty and the other student working that night stared at us like we'd lost our minds. We were both shaking, trying to explain what happened. After a while, the keeper admitted other people had reported strange things in those woods before, though nothing exactly like what we described. That didn't help, honestly. It only made the whole thing settle deeper into my chest. What stayed with me most was Elise. She was one of the calmest people on our team, steady in every kind of situation, and she was deeply unsettled. On the drive home, she told us her grandmother had taught her spiritual beliefs growing up, and she thought whatever had been out there was something dangerous, something not human. She said the moment we got home, we needed to go straight inside, lock the doors, and not linger outside for any reason. She kept saying she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. No one laughed. No one argued. One of the others got so frightened she started crying, and the rest of the drive passed in silence. Nothing like that ever happened again. We went back to work, finished the study, and life moved on the way life always does. But that night has never really left me. I still think about the music, the silence of the monkeys, and that awful certainty that something was standing just out of sight, waiting for us to look. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was only music from far away and fear filling in the blanks. Maybe it was some strange trick of the woods at night. Or maybe it was something I still don't have the language to explain. I just know that whatever happened out there felt real, and even now, remembering it gives me the same chill. So, I want to tell you about my grandma, because even after all these years, I still feel her with me. She passed away from cancer in 2016 when I was 15. We were incredibly close. It always felt like it was mostly just the two of us against the world, especially because a lot of my dad's side of the family were cruel in ways that are hard to explain unless you've lived it. When she got sick, The people who should have protected her failed her. My grandfather walked away when things got hard, and my biological father never even gave her the dignity of a real funeral. After my grandfather sold the house they had shared for more than 20 years, he took off to chase this dream of traveling around in a camper. That was never her dream. She was sick, exhausted, constantly at doctor appointments, and she needed stability, not highways. So she ended up living in my dad's cramped apartment, and it broke her heart. She was devastated, and honestly, anyone would have been. My dad told me that while he was at work, I needed to take care of her. I was just a kid, trying to figure out rides, schedules, and how to avoid being around him as much as possible. I didn't want that responsibility, but I loved her, so I did everything I could. I showed up for her in every way I knew how. A few days before she passed, my dad came home early one winter night, drunk and angry, and threw me out of the apartment around 2 in the morning. It was freezing. I had no car, nowhere to go right away, and I was terrified. My mom said she could come get me at sunrise, so I just had to make it through the night. What I remember most is my grandma coming outside after me, dragging her oxygen tank with her. She was crying. I was crying. And she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry your father turned out this way. I did not raise him like this." I have never forgotten those words. I asked her if he was hurting her too, and she told me no, that he treated her differently. I hugged her so tight that night. Somewhere deep down, I think I knew it might be the last time. A few days later, my dad called me. His voice was cold, flat. He said, "She died. Come get her things." My mom drove me over. The whole place felt wrong the second I walked in. He handed me a few things and basically told me not to expect anything. But I wasn't there for possessions. I never cared about any of that. I just wanted her back healthy again, laughing again, sitting in the home I grew up visiting, the one that actually felt like hers. Then he did something I'll never unsee. He shoved his phone in my face and showed me a photo of her after she died, lying on the floor. It was brutal. I didn't need that image in my mind, but it's still there. The one detail that stuck with me was the morning light coming through the room, falling across her in that darkness. I can still see it. I grabbed the little things that were hers and headed for the door, barely holding myself together. As I was leaving, he said there would be no funeral, no service, nothing. He said her ashes would be scattered in Lake Huron. I remember feeling grief first, then anger right behind it. But stronger than both was this overwhelming feeling that I needed to leave right then and never come back. And I didn't. That same day, I went to pick up my younger sister from the bus stop. I had just gotten my license not long before, and I remember being happy to see her because she was this bright little piece of normal life after so much darkness. She got in the car, and I realized I'd left my phone back at home on the charger. I remember thinking, great, but we were only a few blocks away, so it didn't really matter. Then, the car started ringing. I answered without even thinking, and I heard this voice, warm and cheerful, say, "Hi, honey, how are you?" It was so familiar, so comforting. I said, "Who is this?" And there was static for a second. Then I froze, because I remembered my phone was not in the car. It was at home. My little sister looked at me and asked who it was, and I just stared at her. Then the voice said, "I love you. I'm all right, sweetheart. I'm always with you." And then the call ended. I knew. I knew exactly who it was. I rushed home and told my mom everything. She looked at me like she already understood and said, "That was your sign. She wanted you to know she's okay." Later that night, I was lying in bed, half drifting off, and I felt this presence near me. Not frightening, just heavy, almost sacred. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered, and all I heard was static. But somehow, I didn't need words. I believed that was her too. Like one more touch on the shoulder before she let go. A few weeks after that, my grandfather showed up at our door unexpectedly. I hadn't seen him since he left her. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. I let him in, but I didn't say much. He told me he'd been having nightmares. He said he kept waking up to strange phone calls where no one spoke. And I just listened because in my heart, I already felt what it meant. Then he started talking about how he'd been living in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and how things had gotten strange there. He said he kept seeing a woman, hearing things, feeling like he was being watched. He even told me this woman kept telling him he didn't belong there. I remember looking at him and feeling this sharp anger rise in me, because part of me thought, good. Let him feel unsettled. Let him carry a fraction of the fear and guilt he left my grandma with. He said he was scared and moving back. I told him goodbye, and that was that. From what I heard later, he did move back, but he was never the same. These days, all I ever catch are occasional posts online about some trail he's walking or a dog he adopted named Spirit. It's strange, honestly. But what has stayed with me most is that call. It's been almost 10 years, and nothing like that has ever happened to me again. Not once. That's part of why I believe it mattered. I've always been sensitive to things I can't fully explain, and sometimes I still wonder if that was her way of saying goodbye without really saying goodbye. Or maybe not goodbye at all. Maybe just, I'm still here. And truthfully, when I think of her, that's what I choose to believe. I need to tell you about my brother, Mateo. He was still just a teenager when my parents decided to send him to Mexico to get him away from the gangs. Things had gotten bad enough that they felt it was the only way to protect him. I went almost a full year without seeing him, and when I finally did, we stayed up late talking, trying to make up for all that lost time. That night, while we were catching up, he shared the most terrifying story I had ever heard. He told me that back then, he used to come home drunk pretty often, but one night was different. He said he barely even remembered how he got home. The last thing he clearly remembered was falling backward onto his bed, completely out of it. A moment later, he thought he heard his bedroom door open, and then shut again. When he lifted his head to see if someone had come in, the whole room felt like it was spinning. At first, he blamed the alcohol. He figured he should get up and lock the door, just in case. But when he tried to move, he realized something was very wrong. His bed was no longer touching the floor. He said it was hovering. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something standing in the room. When he turned to look at it, he told me he saw what he could only describe as the devil himself. He said it was enormous, so big he couldn't understand how something that size could even fit inside the room. Its skin looked like it was burning red, and its horns were thick and twisted, like old tree branches. He said it looked furious, just absolutely full of rage. Mateo told me he didn't even realize he'd been screaming until our grandmother rushed into the room. Now, my grandmother was tiny. She was maybe 4'9" on a good day. But he said when she walked in and spoke, her voice filled that room with a power that felt just as huge as the thing standing there. She shouted at it, told it that it was not welcome in her home, and ordered it to leave. And just like that, it vanished. He said he was still in shock when the bed suddenly dropped back to the ground. He tried to jump off, but our grandmother told him to stay exactly where he was, and he listened. He lay there stiff as a board while she started praying the rosary over him. He told me he had never slept as deeply as he did that night, and he had never slept like that again afterward. But that wasn't the only time. He said there was another encounter, and somehow it was even worse. One night, he woke up to the feeling of someone pulling him by his feet. When he looked down, he said he saw that same dark figure dragging him off the bed. Right near his bedroom door, he had a holy cross hanging on the wall. He managed to reach out and grab it just before whatever had hold of him could pull him any farther. The second he held it up, the figure disappeared. When it was over, he realized he was no longer in bed. He had been dragged all the way to just outside his bedroom. I told him right away that there was no way, that he had to be making that one up. The first story was terrifying enough, but at least our grandmother had witnessed it too. This second one felt impossible. Then he told me to go talk to one of his friends. This friend had been around our family for years. After his mother passed away, we more or less took him in, so I trusted him. When I asked him about that night, he got very serious. He told me he had seen it too. He told me the worst part wasn't just the fear, it was the helplessness. Seeing someone you care about being pulled away and not being able to move even an inch. That kind of helplessness stays with a person. He said he kept trying to yell to Mateo, telling him to grab the cross. Later, Mateo said he never heard him. But somehow, he still reached for it. So that made 2 encounters. And both of them had witnesses. What stayed with me most, though, was something else he admitted later. He said that for as long as he could remember, he had always had dreams about demons, about dark things, about the devil. But after our grandmother prayed over him that night, those dreams slowly started to fade. Not all at once, but little by little. I haven't asked him about those dreams in a long time. I guess some things just become too heavy to bring back up. And to be honest with you, we don't really talk about our dreams anymore. You know, back around 2010, my sister moved to a different town for work, and during the week she was gone until really late at night. That meant my niece and her younger brothers were home on their own a lot more than they should have been. Around that time, I started noticing my niece, Mariella, was calling me almost every evening. One night she said, "Don't you think it's weird that I keep calling you like this?" And I told her, "No, baby, you're my niece. You could disappear for 5 years and call me out of nowhere and I'd still pick up." I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. Said she loved me. At first, I'll be honest, sometimes I just let her talk while I half listened. I thought maybe she was lonely, maybe she just needed company. But then one night, I really listened, and what she told me chilled me straight through. She said, "There's something coming from my mom's room. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels wrong. Heavy. Mean." She told me that every time she got near that room, the air felt thicker, like it pressed against her chest. She said it was so bad she stopped sleeping in her own room because it was directly above her mother's. She said whenever she stepped inside that room, it felt like she couldn't breathe, like the whole space was packed with rage. Then she said something I never forgot. She said, "It feels like somebody died in there hating everything." I asked her if her mother felt any of that, but she told me her mom was barely home long enough to notice anything. Now, I should tell you, Mariella had always been the kind of child who noticed things other people didn't. Ever since she was little, she'd draw strange things she said she saw. I remember one time she kept sketching this dark shape in the corner of every page. At first it was small, then in each drawing it got bigger and bigger. I finally asked her, "What is that supposed to be? The moon? A shadow?" And she said, "No, it's the thing I see in my room at night." I asked if it scared her. She said, "Not really." And that broke my heart more than if she'd said yes. She'd already been through so much by then. Her mother was emotionally gone, her father had drifted out of her life, and I think she had learned to live beside things that would have terrified somebody else. Some kids cry, some kids act out. Mariella just kept seeing things and carrying on. Anyway, a few days after that conversation, I had one of the strangest experiences of my life. Early one morning, I woke up suddenly, straight upright in bed, with that awful feeling that something wasn't right. I got up and started toward the bathroom, and from there I could see part of my backyard through the window. I had this strong feeling that someone was out there. The window was shut, and I remember trying to peek out without being seen. But somehow, in the next instant, I was outside. That was when I realized I was still dreaming, or at least, I thought I had to be. I looked down at my hands and my arms, and they were translucent. Not invisible exactly, just thin and see-through, like smoke shaped into a person. And I remember thinking, for one brief second, this is incredible. Then the fear hit me. Not ordinary fear either. It wrapped around me so fast and so completely that I could barely think. It felt ancient, suffocating, like I had stepped into somebody else's terror and it had closed around my throat. That's when I saw them. The man stood rigid, full of anger. But underneath that anger was fear. I could feel it as clearly as if it were my own. My hands flew to my throat because suddenly I couldn't breathe. The woman moved restlessly, like someone caught between staying and leaving, like she was trapped in the moment of parting. I had this overwhelming sense that they were at the end of something terrible, that they both knew they were about to go in different directions forever. Then the man turned and looked directly at me, and I woke up. Later that same week, Mariella called me again, but this time she sounded excited, almost breathless. She told me her coach had driven her home because her mom still wasn't back, and somewhere in conversation, the coach mentioned that a couple had died in that house years earlier. According to what she'd heard, the husband had killed his wife after accusing her of cheating. The second she said that, everything in me went cold. Because suddenly the heaviness in that room, the suffocating feeling, the hatred she described, my dream, all of it seemed to click into place. It didn't prove anything, not really, but it fit in a way that made my skin crawl. Then we looked into it more, and this is the part that still gets me. The people connected to that house looked exactly like the couple I had seen in my dream. I even described their clothes before seeing any photos. I told her the man wore a white hat, a white button-up shirt, pale blue jeans, and white cowboy boots. The woman had on a brown dress, and her hair was long, dark, and curly. I remembered earthy colors on her, soft floral details, bare legs, clunky shoes. Their faces in the dream had been blurred somehow, like I wasn't meant to see them clearly, but the rest of them I remembered perfectly. Mariella and I just sat with that for a while, trying to make sense of it. She kept asking me why they would come to me in a dream when she was the one living in that house. I never found an answer for that. Maybe because she was too close to it, and I was the one listening. Maybe whatever was there wanted to be seen by someone who would believe her. Or maybe some things don't wait for explanations. What mattered most to me was that, after that, Mariella finally felt like she wasn't imagining it. She wasn't crazy, and she wasn't alone. Eventually, she convinced her mother to move, and they did. You know, back then I was playing in a rock band based out of Uvalde, Texas, and every weekend I'd make the drive in from San Antonio. It was close to 2 hours each way, so by the time I got there, usually around 4 in the afternoon, I was already settling in for a long night. We'd rehearse for hours, sometimes until 2 or even 3 in the morning. Then there'd be the usual band night stuff, grabbing food, knocking back a few beers, talking too much, laughing too loud. After that, I'd pack up my gear and head home alone. There was one night I still can't shake. I left Uvalde around 2:30 in the morning, same as always. I usually took the quieter roads out of town before getting onto Highway 90 East. Less traffic, less hassle, just me and the dark road ahead. It felt easier that way. I hadn't even made it to the main road yet when I saw her. She was a young woman walking alone in the dark, wearing this striking crimson dress. She turned, saw my headlights, and started waving me down like she really needed help. So I pulled over. She came up smiling, almost oddly cheerful for someone standing alone in the middle of the night, and asked if I could give her a ride. She said she was late to a party and was hoping I could help her get there. I didn't think too hard about it. I just saw somebody out there by herself and figured I should help. She got into the back seat, and I remember, half joking, half serious, asking, "You're not setting me up, are you?" She laughed right away and said, "No, of course not." We started talking like it was the most normal thing in the world. At one point, I even asked, "What are you, a ghost or something?" And she laughed again and said, "No, I'm a vampire." I laughed too, but mostly I was just focused on dropping her off and starting that long drive back home. The strange part started when I came up on the turn I normally took to get to Highway 90. I was about to turn right, and she told me to go left. That felt wrong immediately. Still, I listened, and within minutes, everything changed. The houses disappeared. The streetlights disappeared. It got empty fast, like the world had just folded shut around us. I kept checking with her, asking, "Are you sure this is the way?" And every time she'd just giggle and say something like, "Yeah, don't worry, you're fine. The party's big. You should come hang out." Then she told me to turn again and said it was just past the train tracks, that she'd get out there. So I did. We came to this pitch-black crossroads in the middle of nowhere. No music, no lights, no cars, no sign of any party at all. She opened the door, stepped out, leaned down by my window, and told me again I should come join them. Then she walked off into the dark. I turned the car around so my headlights would face the direction she'd gone. And she was gone. Just gone. There was nobody there. I sat there staring, trying to make sense of it. Then I locked my doors, reached into the glove compartment, and pulled out my pistol because suddenly my whole body was telling me something was deeply wrong. I scanned the area with my headlights, then drove a quick circle with my high beams on. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no house, no party, no woman in a red dress. Just silence. I hit the gas and got out of there fast. Didn't look back. I picked her up near a side street just outside town, and the road she had me take led way out into open country. Later on, I tried looking into whether there had ever been an accident or a death in that area matching her description, but I never found anything. And then, she vanished.